Mrs. Whitford, I'm sorry, but I saw this and I haven't been able to sleep. The photographer's trembling voice came through the phone. On my computer screen, she zoomed in on a photo from my daughter's wedding, and instantly, my blood pressure seemed to drop into a void. In the frame, my daughter's newlywed husband was pressing a red-haired woman against a wall, his hand wrapped around her back, their lips touching as if they had never belonged to Jacqueline. The worst part, the photo was taken exactly 2 hours before the ceremony. I collapsed into my chair, my breathing scattered. But then a cold thought slipped in. If this was real, then everything that had happened over the past 3 months, from the strange money requests to my younger daughter's disrespect, carried a very familiar scent: manipulation. And I realized this battle had only just begun. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I sat frozen in my familiar workspace, the room filled with the scent of pine and varnish, the place where I'd spent decades building our small family woodworking shop in Scottsdale. Yet Marcy Donalds's voice still echoed in my ears like a final alarm before disaster. I was 68, widowed for 8 years, believing my life, though lonely, was at least stable, until an unknown number called and pulled me into a storm I never imagined. "You need to come to my studio as soon as possible. Alone," Marcy said. "Please don't tell Jackie, not yet." That one sentence sent a chill straight down my spine. My eldest daughter, Jacqueline Whitford, or Jackie as people called her, had been married only 3 weeks. A grand wedding at a resort in Fountain Hills, where I'd spent almost $70,000 just to see my daughter happy, stepping into a new life with the man she believed was right. Daniel Foster, a polished, soft-spoken financial specialist who seemed so genuine even I told myself more than once, she found the right one. But I no longer trusted the things I told myself. Ever since Jackie's wedding, I'd noticed small but heavy changes. She visited less, but every visit came with money requests. The way she spoke, the way her eyes scanned my house as if evaluating assets, it all unsettled me, though I ignored it. Who wants to think poorly of their own child? And then, this morning, Marcy's call ripped the last veil away. I shut my laptop, trying to stand, but my legs felt like they no longer belonged to me. I braced against the table, feeling as if all the air had been pulled out of the room. I exhaled shakily, and from the living room, Lily's voice struck me like a slap. "Mom, where's your credit card? I need to put down a deposit to fix Brandon's car." I closed my eyes. Since Lily and her boyfriend, Brandon, had moved in temporarily, I thought I was helping her through a rough patch after losing her job. But temporarily had stretched into 4 years. Brandon lay around the house like he owned it, and Lily needed a few $100s from me every week for one reason or another. I stepped out of my workspace, already exhausted before speaking. "Lily, I'm busy. We'll talk later." "Later? You're always later. I already told you Brandon's car broke down, or do you want me to be embarrassed out there on the street?" She said, embarrassed, as if I were the reason she was ashamed, not the 35-year-old man refusing to get a job. I didn't answer. I walked straight to the kitchen for a glass of water, hiding the tremble in my hands. Then Marcy texted, "Mrs. Whitford, I'm really worried about you. Please come see me tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything clearly." I set the phone down, feeling my heartbeat in a hollow space inside my chest. I didn't know what scared me more, the truth hiding in that photograph or the idea of having to tell my daughter. That evening, after a dinner, Lily and Brandon didn't bother to clean up. The doorbell rang. Jackie stepped inside, perfect as always. Cream blazer, expensive handbag, golden hair curled neatly. "Hi, Mom." She kissed my cheek, then sat on the sofa. "Daniel and I want to buy a house, a place in North Scottsdale. 4 bedrooms, pool, great view. We just need you to help with $40,000 for the down payment." Just need you to help. She said it as if I were financially responsible for her marriage, as if the nearly $70,000 I had spent on the wedding wasn't a big deal, as if being widowed and running the woodworking shop alone for 8 years was invisible. I asked softly, "You need it that urgently?" Jackie looked at me as though my question was the unreasonable part. "Of course, Mom. The market's hot. Daniel and I have seen that house 3 times already. I'm telling you tonight because I know you'll help. You always do." I looked into her eyes and realized her smile didn't reach them. It was the smile of someone used to being given what they wanted, someone used to taking without offering anything in return. I nodded, neither agreeing nor refusing. She hugged me, a cold hug, then left. The headlights of her Mercedes swept across the living room window before disappearing, leaving the house in darkness. I stood still for a moment, then turned toward the kitchen. Dirty dishes, pizza boxes on the table, Brandon's shoes in the middle of the floor. I no longer felt like the homeowner, but like a resource for the selfish adults I had raised. I returned to my workspace, shut the door, and sighed deeply. The pine wall I had built myself last year felt like it was closing in on me. The darkness outside the window blended with the darkness inside me, and for the first time I wondered, how long has it been since I lived for myself? That night, I reopened Marcy's message, staring at the last line. "I believe you need to know." I was a strong woman, but my eyes stung so sharply I covered them with my hand. Not because I feared the truth in the photo, but because if this was real, my entire family had been built on a lie, a very expensive lie. I sat at the edge of my bed, my hands still shaking. I thought of my husband, Jonathan, and wondered what he would do. He always taught me to trust myself, even when trust in others became difficult. And in that moment, I knew Jonathan would never want me to close my eyes and let this slide. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. I heard Lily and Brandon laughing loudly in the living room, every burst of laughter stabbing through my thoughts each time I closed my eyes. I felt like I was living with strangers. By 3 a.m., I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering into the darkness. If this is real, Eleanor, you need to prepare for the worst. And I knew. Tomorrow morning, I would meet Marcy Donalds. No matter how cruel the truth might be, I had no way back now. I had to face it. I had to know why the man my daughter married had embraced another woman just 2 hours before his vows. And more importantly, I had to know when my family had drifted so far from love and whether I had the strength to pull myself out of the wreckage. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The Scottsdale sky was barely light, a pale blue veil over the distant McDowell Mountains. I tried to sip coffee, but the familiar smell did nothing to soothe the dull ache behind my eyes. I inhaled deeply, slipped on an old cardigan, and walked to my car. The drive to Marcy's studio felt longer than usual, maybe because I saw everything through the fog of my own dread. Her studio sat in the quiet arts district, a red brick building with large glass windows. I stood at the door for a few seconds, gripping my purse strap before pushing it open. The bell chimed softly, and Marcy appeared immediately. Her face was pale, her eyes apologetic. "Mrs. Whitford, "Thank you for coming," she said in a hoarse whisper. I nodded, afraid my voice would crack if I spoke. She led me through the small gallery into the editing room where a large monitor waited. Wedding photos I once admired now weighed heavily on my chest. Marcy sat, her hands trembling slightly as she moved the mouse. I need to say this first. I didn't go looking for these. I was adjusting lighting to finalize the album, but when I saw them, she stopped, inhaled shakily. Seconds later, the photo I'd seen the night before appeared again, sharper now, undeniable. Every detail of Daniel's face, every finger pressing into that woman's waist, the way her red hair lifted in the breeze, their expressions so familiar, so intimate. I swallowed hard. "Could you zoom in again?" She did, and when the image filled the screen, I saw the slim diamond wedding band on the woman's ring finger. A wedding ring! That realization forced me to sit. "I don't know who she is," Marcy whispered. "I checked the guest list. No one matches her." I steadied my voice. "And the timestamp?" She pulled up the metadata. Date, hour, GPS. Everything aligned perfectly with the venue. I didn't understand all the technical language, but the data was clear. Numbers don't lie. 2 hours before the ceremony, I repeated, the words like stones in my mouth. Marcy nodded. I looked at the screen, but my mind drifted far away. Outside the room, I heard the city waking up, but everything felt muffled under the pounding of my heart. I remembered Daniel's warm smile, the vows he spoke. All of it now felt like a carefully crafted performance. "Why?" I whispered without meaning to. "Why marry my daughter if—" I couldn't finish. Marcy placed a small USB drive on the table. "Everything is here. The photos, the data, everything I found. I don't know what you'll do next, but I thought you should have it." I picked it up. It weighed almost nothing, yet felt heavy enough to break my spine. "Why are you helping me?" I murmured. She touched my arm lightly. "Because if I were the mother of the bride, I would want to know the truth." I couldn't recall how I left the studio. I only remembered sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel while sunlight pierced through the windshield, as if trying to expose the truth I wished I hadn't seen. I sat there for a long time until sweat dampened my palms. Driving home, Jackie's words from last night replayed in my head. "You only need to help 40,000. You always take care of us." I had thought it was entitlement, but now, with the photos in my purse, the picture sharpened into something much darker. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just fake love. This was a plan executed with precision. The lavish wedding paid by me. The demand for cash gifts only, Daniel's flawless behavior, Jackie's sudden change after the wedding. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed the image I dreaded. Money. Nothing else was the motive. I remembered Jackie rising from the sofa the night before, tossing out, "I told Daniel you'd agree. You always take care of us." Yes, I had taken care of them. I had raised them with every ounce of love I had. But somewhere along the way, they began seeing me as a resource, not a mother. A cold wave ran down my spine, not because of Daniel's infidelity, but because my own children had started tearing our family apart with their greed. When I reached home, I turned off the engine but stayed in the car. My house sat quietly under the Arizona sun, but I felt like I was staring at something rotten beneath its walls. Inside, Lily and Brandon were laughing as I walked in. Brandon's feet were propped on my table, and Lily was photographing a plate of food as though preparing for a magazine spread. Neither of them noticed my expression. Neither sensed that the truth in my purse could set this entire household on fire. I walked straight to my workspace and shut the door. I set the USB in the middle of my desk. Sunlight caught the metal surface, making it look like evidence in a crime investigation. I stared at it for a long moment, then leaned back. I'm not letting them take another $1 from me. I spoke aloud, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The sentence wasn't fueled by anger. It was shaped by pain, humiliation, and the realization that being used by the people I loved had hollowed me out for years. I didn't yet know exactly what to do next, but I knew I would never again let anyone, child or not, treat my life as their bank account. I closed my eyes, imagining the road ahead, consulting a lawyer, reviewing all my assets, preparing to confront Jackie, reclaiming my home from Lily and Brandon. But before all that, I needed one thing. I needed to be strong. No more soft Eleanor. No more mother who always yielded. No more woman who let people take advantage. When I opened my eyes, the sun had risen higher, washing my desk in light. I stood, walked to the door, and placed my hand on the cool metal knob. A new chapter of my life was waiting, one I had never planned, never wanted, but now had no choice but to write. And I would write it. For myself. For the truth. For the years of life I refused to give away to lies. I inhaled deeply and whispered to myself, "All right, Eleanor, time to move forward." I stood there for a long time, knowing that turning this doorknob meant my old life would crumble behind me, revealing truths I wasn't ready to face. But then I flipped on the light, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. My familiar space, the pine scent, the shelves I built myself, the warm glow from my lamp, suddenly felt like a place I no longer belonged, as if I were a guest wandering through my own home. I set my purse down on the table and let myself fall into the chair, trying to breathe steadily to push away the tightness rising in my throat. But before I could gather myself, Brandon's voice boomed from outside, loud enough to shatter the fragile silence I was clinging to. "Eleanor, can you grab me a Coke?" His voice was low, commanding, like he was calling for a servant. I walked into the living room. Brandon was sprawled across the sofa, feet propped on the table, sneakers covered in dust. He didn't look at me, his eyes glued to the sports program on TV. His posture was no different from someone who owned the house. He acted as though he had long forgotten that he was merely my daughter's unemployed boyfriend, someone I had financially supported for 4 years. I kept my voice even. "Get it yourself, Brandon." He glanced at me, shrugged, and continued watching TV. Such a small gesture, yet it made me realize the last traces of respect had fallen away with time. Before I could return to my room, Lily called from upstairs, her voice sharp and irritated. "Mom, where's your credit card? I need to book a spa appointment." "This afternoon," I stopped. All day I had been trying to hide my pain, trying to stay calm, but Lily's demands for money pierced straight through the most vulnerable part of me. I didn't reply. I went back into my workspace and shut the door, this time harder. I sat down, opened a drawer, and pulled out the wedding folder I had kept since Jackie began planning. I once thought it was a cute keepsake. Flower quotes, the photography contract, venue fees. But today, they were no longer memories. They were evidence. I opened the expense sheet. The number appeared clearly, $68,000. All of it from me. Not partially, not shared, all. Back then, I told myself I was doing it for Jackie, hoping she'd have a perfect wedding. Now looking back, I wondered, had Jackie ever thought about lowering costs because of how hard I'd worked all these years? Or had she simply pushed everything to the highest tier to maximize my investment? I flipped to the page about wedding gifts. Jackie once told me, "Mom, everyone prefers cash now. It's so much more convenient. Physical gifts are just clutter." I had agreed without hesitation. But now, remembering that moment, a different layer of truth surfaced. Cash gifts mean easy to split, easy to hide, easy to turn into something else. My breath grew shallow as I recalled those thick envelopes left on the reception table, love offerings from my friends, colleagues, and family, perhaps becoming part of someone's plan. I wrote down the number. Wedding cash gifts, $47,000, most of it from people I had known for years. I wondered, did Daniel know this from the start? Was he the one who suggested cash only? Or was it Jackie? I didn't want to believe that. But the photos Marcy had shown me had ripped open a door of truth that I could no longer shut. I picked up a pen, my hand still trembling, and began writing every detail I remembered. The day Jackie insisted on cash gifts, the times Daniel praised me for being generous, how they talked about their financial future as if already calculated, the occasions Jackie dodged questions about their joint accounts. I didn't know why I was writing all of this, but something instinctive told me I needed to record every piece, as though, if I didn't, the fragments would vanish and I'd never be able to assemble the terrifying picture taking shape. The door creaked open. Lily walked in without knocking. "Mom, I called you and you didn't answer. What's wrong? Are you overthinking things again?" I looked up at her. Lily's expression was not concern. It was irritation that I hadn't answered her demands. She crossed her arms and sighed. "Mom, don't think too much. The older you get, the more paranoid you become. Life isn't that complicated." That sentence, simple, careless, and dismissive, cut deeper than anything else today. I looked at my younger daughter, the same, 34-year-old who once cried into my arms after her first breakup. The same girl who sat behind me during that long summer road trip across Arizona. The same child I held when she felt life was unfair, now standing in front of me, seeing her mother as an obstacle. It felt like something gripped my heart tightly. Not anger, but a sadness so sharp I couldn't breathe. Lily rolled her eyes. "I'm going to the spa. Brandon's hungry. Can you make him something?" She closed the door before I could answer. I sat still, my hand resting on the open page. The lines I had written blurred as my eyes burned. It took me several minutes to realize I was crying, not because of Daniel, not because of Jackie, but because of Lily, because my own daughter saw me as an ATM and a shadow easy to manipulate. I wiped my face, inhaled, and felt something small but powerful shift inside me. Something long buried began to rise. Self-protection. I wrote another line in my notebook. My daughter sees me as a tool. Her boyfriend treats my home as his own. That single line, though written as a note, felt like the first time I had called the truth by its real name. I could not stay silent forever. I could not keep closing my eyes. I could not let the rest of my years be used for purposes I never agreed to. That night, for the first time in years, I locked my bedroom door. Lily knocked a few times, calling my name, but I didn't open it. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, letting silence fill the room. I knew I had crossed an invisible boundary, the boundary between endurance and awakening. I whispered into the darkness, a quiet vow to myself. Enough. Eleanor won't stay silent anymore. And I knew everything would change from here. But I also knew it was what I needed to reclaim what was left of my peace. I thought I might sleep a little that night, after such a long day and discoveries that squeezed my heart until it hurt. But as I changed clothes and reached for the bedroom light switch, I heard Lily's voice coming from the living room. Her tone was bright and overly cheerful, completely different from the indifference she had shown me earlier. I froze, my hand still on the switch. A sharp instinct crawled up my spine. I needed to listen. I cracked the door open and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet except for the warm light from the living room glowing onto the ceiling. Lily's voice echoed. She had put the call on speaker, as if the conversation needed no privacy, no consideration for anyone sharing the house. I stood on the stairs, hidden in the dark, heart pounding without knowing why. "Tell me again," Lily laughed, a sugary laugh with something sour underneath. "She's really gonna dump him? In 2 months?" Then Jackie's voice came through. Clear, cold, nothing like the girl who once held my hand running along Santa Monica Beach when she was 10. "Yeah, in 2 months it'll be done. Clean divorce, no. Drama. And we split the wedding gifts 60-40. I get the bigger share because Mom paid for the whole wedding." I gripped the wooden railing so hard that my fingertips went numb. My heart twisted, then dropped as if losing all warmth at once. Lily burst into laughter. Oh my God, she'd faint if she knew, but she won't. Mom's old, so easy to fool. The words old and easy to fool cut through me like a thin, cold blade. I stood frozen, my breath breaking in my chest. Not because Jackie was planning a divorce, not because they were dividing wedding gifts like loot, but because my daughter, the one I raised with everything I had, called me those words without hesitation or compassion. Jackie continued, her voice emotionless, like discussing a bargain item. "Once everything's done, I'll tell Mom I need to move out, start fresh after the heartbreak. She'll feel sorry for me and pay the down payment automatically. She always does." Lily chimed in immediately. "I'm doing the same thing with Mom. She's used to it. Yesterday I told her my car broke down and she's already thinking of buying me a new one. I just need to ask a few more times so she gets used to spending." I nearly lost my grip on the railing. I, who had raised both girls with money earned from sweat in our woodworking shop, had turned into a wallet they could manipulate and practice tactics on. Lily's voice rang out again. "Brandon says she's predictable. Say something sweet and she believes it. I mentioned wanting to go to the spa and she didn't even dare say no. That's what happens when you're old." My legs shook so hard I had to lean into the wall to stay upright. Not from insult, from clarity. Clarity that the people I loved had been treating my affection as something cheap. I steadied my breath, trying not to let a sob escape. Lily would hear it. She would know. Jackie spoke again. "Just make her think Daniel and I are genuinely happy. When the divorce happens, I'll play the betrayed wife. She'll blame him and open her wallet. The house deposit will take care of itself." Lily asked, curious. "What about Mom's trust? I heard old people change wills all the time." Jackie answered casually, "Who knows? But let's take advantage while she's still soft. Old people are all emotional." I heard chairs moving and more laughter. Bright, carefree laughter, as if they were enjoying a late-night comedy, unaware that every word was slicing my heart open. I backed away from the stairs step by step, like a ghost drifting through its own home. The house felt suffocating, the walls closing in. I retreated to my room and locked the door with trembling hands. Under the dim glow of the bedside lamp, I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the uneven beats. Every emotional defense I had collapsed within minutes. What I heard wasn't just betrayal, it was a coordinated plan, calculated by the daughters I had poured the best years of my life into loving and protecting. I sat at the edge of my bed, not crying, not screaming. The pain was so deep that the tears felt trapped in my throat. I only felt cold, a coldness that seeped to the bone. I thought of Jackie as a child, her tiny hand gripping my shirt when she feared thunderstorms. I thought of Lily running into my arms, sobbing after her first fall. Those memories clashed violently with the present, two worlds that no longer touched. The maternal love inside me, always gentle, patient, forgiving, fractured like glass, struck with a hammer. I whispered to the empty room, my voice barely audible. How could you? But the question floated in the air, unanswered. I walked to my desk and looked at the open notebook with the list of suspicions I had started hours earlier. I added a new line, writing slowly, each stroke carving into my heart. They are not only using me, they are performing behind my back. Then a clear thought rose in my mind, bright as a lamp turning on in the dark. I cannot let this continue for even one more day. Facing two manipulative daughters and a deceitful man like Daniel would not be easy. But the truth I heard tonight had transformed my pain into resolve. If I didn't act now, if I kept softening, kept believing sweet, empty words, I would lose everything, including myself. I closed the notebook, breathed deeply to steady myself. And in that moment, I knew what I needed to do. Tomorrow, I would see a lawyer. I would no longer allow myself to be led around. I would no longer let the people I once loved control every breath of my remaining years. I turned off the light. The room fell into darkness, but in my heart, for the first time in a long while, a faint glow, small but unmistakable, began to rise. Not hope, strength. A strength I never thought I still had after 68. And so, in the quiet of the night, I took my first step out of the hurt and onto the path where I would reclaim my life. I arrived at Attorney Harold McIntyre's office the next morning, a mix of tension and determination churning inside me. The late June Scottsdale sun burned fiercely, its light shimmering against the pavement. I sat in my car for a moment, my hand resting on the steering wheel, feeling as if I were about to step into a confrontation I had never imagined facing. All my life, I had been the mediator, the peacemaker, the one who soothed family conflicts. But today, for the first time, I was here to declare something. I would protect myself. Harold's office was inside a quiet, elegant 3-story glass building. The sign reading Harold McIntyre, Family and Estate Law was mounted near the entrance, gold lettering on walnut. Inside, the soft scent of pine and fresh paper greeted me, reminding me of my late husband's workshop, where he once spent hours at the lathe. The memory nearly made me wobble. Harold stood as soon as his assistant led me into the IE conference room. He looked to be in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, formal demeanor, but calm, respectful eyes, the kind that made people trust him without being told to. "Mrs. Whitford," he said, extending a hand, his deep voice steady, "please have a seat. My assistant said you have an urgent matter?" I took a deep breath, set my bag on the glass table, then pulled out the USB Marcy had given me, along with the notebook filled with numbers, dates, and the conversations I'd heard the night before. "I need you to look at these," I said, hearing my own voice tremble slightly. I think my daughters are deceiving me, and my son-in-law too." Harold tilted his head, not surprised, simply turning on his computer and inserting the USB. When the photos appeared, Daniel holding the red-haired woman tightly, his hand tangled in her hair, he frowned and took precise notes. "Does this photo have metadata?" he asked. "Yes, the photographer verified everything for me." "Good, very good." What struck me was that he didn't react with shock or pity. He received everything with a cool professionalism, but not indifference. A part of me felt steadier. Clearly, this was not beyond his ability to handle. "And this," I said, opening the notebook to the page where I had written down the conversation between Lily and Jackie, my voice gradually more even, more solid, "is what I heard last night." Harold read without interrupting. He simply nodded a few times, as if each line was fitting into a picture he had already partly predicted. When I finished, he set the USB on the table and said, "Mrs. Eleanor, I want you to understand something clearly. This is no longer a normal family issue. This is deliberate financial exploitation." I leaned back. Hearing it spoken aloud by someone else made it real. It was no longer a passing nightmare. It was truth I couldn't deny. "Now," Harold continued, "I need you to provide everything you have. The photos, notes, wedding expense sheets, messages, anything at all." I handed everything to him. They spread across the large table, the evidence of 3 heartbreaking months I had endured in silence. Harold arranged them into sections, then looked straight at me. "First, let's talk about Lily and her boyfriend. How long have they lived in your home?" 4 years, I answered. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "And is there a lease agreement?" "No, just let them stay. I thought Lily needed support after her divorce." Harold nodded, then said something that made me sit upright. "In that case, under Arizona law, you can require them to leave within 30 days. No disputes, no lawsuits. They have no legal right to stay in your house." It felt like the floor lifted beneath me, carrying me toward a light I hadn't seen in months. Truly? I can do that? Completely legal. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from receiving back a power I thought I had lost. Harold went on, "As for your assets, I recommend establishing an irrevocable trust." I knew what a trust was, but not the details, so he explained, step by step. "A will can be contested," he said calmly. "Children can claim you were influenced, pressured, or not mentally sound." I flinched. Jackie had once remarked that older people change their wills often. Clearly, they had considered that angle. "But a trust," he said, resting his hand on the documents, "cannot be reclaimed, cannot be altered by anyone else, and most importantly, cannot be contested. Once assets are placed into a trust, they are nearly fully protected. You can still use them, still live in your home, still manage your money, but after you pass, no one can fight over or seize anything." I sat, stunned. A rare wave of relief washed through my chest. "So, they won't be able to take anything unless I want them to?" Harold smiled, softly but with certainty. "Exactly." For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone in this battle. "I want to establish the trust," I said immediately, "as soon as possible. I don't want them touching anything ever again." Harold made notes quickly, then looked up. "But you must understand, this will make them furious." I met his eyes, calm, steady, unshaken. "They stopped being family," I said, my voice firm enough to surprise even me, "when they started treating me like a wallet." The air in the conference room went still. Harold nodded, not politely, but in acknowledgement of a strength he recognized. "Then let's begin," he said. I signed the legal agreement. The sound of the pen sliding across paper felt like a blade cutting through the invisible rope that had bound me for years. Clean, final, freeing. When I stepped outside the office, the sun was still harsh, but it no longer blinded me. The hot wind blew against my face, but I felt lighter, as if I had just walked out of a dark room where I had been trapped for far too long. Standing beside my car, watching the glass buildings reflect the blinding sky, I thought, Eleanor Whitford has entered a new chapter. I am no longer the woman tossed around by circumstances. From today forward, I hold the wheel. Then I opened my car door, started the engine, and felt certainty settle into my bones. My counterattack, the counterattack of a mother long underestimated, had officially begun. I returned home late in the afternoon, carrying 2 thick yellow envelopes Harold had prepared. He emphasized that these were the first step in the legal process and that how I handed them over mattered less than my resolve, my refusal to yield to tears or rage from people who had thrived on my vulnerability. I sat in my car for a long moment, my hand on the steering wheel staring at the familiar house that suddenly felt foreign, as if it had witnessed far more than I was ready to accept. It had once held laughter, warm dinners, family photos tacked to the walls. Now it felt like a silent battlefield. I inhaled deeply, stepped out of the car, and walked up the stone path to the porch. The envelopes in my hand felt heavy as rocks, but also like shields protecting the rest of my life. Inside, as expected, Brandon was sprawled across the sofa, feet on the table as if it belonged to him. The TV blared a football game and a sweating beer can sat beside him. Lily lounged on the staircase, scrolling her phone, looking far too comfortable for someone living off another person for 4 years. I stood before them, didn't speak at first, and placed the 2 envelopes on the glass table. The soft slap they made was sharp as a blade. Brandon raised a brow, rude as ever. "What's this?" "Eviction notices," I said, my voice calm. So calm it startled even me. "You 2 have 30 days to leave my house." In that instant, the room froze. Brandon shot up from the sofa, face flushing red, veins rising in his neck. "Are you senile, old woman? This is Lily's family home. We've lived here 4 years. You can't just throw us out like dogs." Every word he spat hit the air, but none of it touched me. I'd heard worse. I'd endured more than enough disrespect to become immune. Lily burst into tears instantly, her sobs flowing with the precision of a rehearsed act. "Mom, how could you do this to me? You know I'm struggling. You know I'm just trying to get back on my feet after the divorce. Mom, you're so cruel." I looked at my daughter, the same one who had feverishly clung to me at 7 years old, the same girl with wide, innocent eyes who used to curl against me when the world felt unfair. Now she cried for money, not love. "Lily," I said slowly, "I heard everything last night. I know what you and Jackie are planning. I know you see me as a wallet, so you don't get to say I've betrayed anyone." Lily froze mid-sob, as if slapped. Brandon shot her a sharp look. Then, reflexively, Lily grabbed her phone and dialed. Jackie, listen. Mom's kicking us out. Something's wrong with her. She gave us these papers. It's like she wants us homeless." I stood with my arms crossed, hearing every word Jackie spoke on speaker. On the other end, Jackie's voice came through, angry but not surprised. "What? I'll be there. Don't say anything else. Let me and Daniel handle it." I pressed my lips together. Handle it. As if I were a malfunctioning appliance, not their mother. Brandon turned toward me, voice raised in threat. "You can't do this. We have rights. I swear. We'll sue. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." I didn't react. Didn't argue, didn't shed a tear. I simply repeated the line I had practiced ever since I left Harold's office. "You 2 have 30 days, no more." The room vibrated with their outrage. Lily sobbed harder. Brandon kicked the table leg, knocking over a vase. water spilling onto the rug. I turned away and walked back to my workspace, locking the door, just as Harold advised. I heard Lily's sniffles, Brandon's curses, their frantic whispering. None of it hurt anymore. It only confirmed my decision was right. I opened my notebook and documented each behavior, each word, each reaction. Every detail mattered if they tried anything. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, but not from fear, from the realization that I had stepped into a new version of myself, a woman who protected herself, a woman who no longer mistook silence for kindness, a woman who had endured enough to learn that gentleness is not weakness. When I finished the page, I looked up at the glass panel in my workspace. My reflection stared back, older, tired, but with eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. I was in control. The feeling was so powerful I placed a hand over my chest to steady myself. And what Lily and Jackie didn't know, the truth I had no reason to tell them, was the most important thing of all. Every asset I owned, this house, the woodworking shop, savings, investments, everything had already been transferred into the trust. No one, not a single person could touch it. Not my daughters, not my son-in-law, not the freeloader in my living room. I closed the notebook and leaned back, filled with a strange calm. The battle had begun, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one pushed into the corner. I was the one stepping forward. I was the one holding the light. I was the one deciding. And silently, I made a promise no one else could hear. Eleanor Whitford will not let anyone take her life from her ever again. I knew from the moment I heard Jackie's car pull into the driveway that the evening wouldn't be just another family dinner. Not after everything that had happened, not after I handed the eviction notices to Lily and Brandon, and certainly not after the whispered schemes Jackie murmured on the phone, words that still felt carved into the walls of my mind. I stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of sauce, the steam rising and fogging my glasses. I tried to keep everything steady, tried to ensure my hands didn't tremble, even though I knew tonight wasn't about the roasted chicken I was preparing. It was about the final confrontation between me and the daughters I once believed would never betray me. The door opened. Jackie stepped in first, polished as always, hair tied neatly, a stylish plaid jacket, a smile practiced to perfection, but I could see the urgency beneath her makeup. "Mom," Jackie said, as if a peaceful evening awaited us, "I brought fresh bread. We can have it with your dinner." Daniel followed her. His eyes slid past me quickly, then lingered on the living room, where Lily and Brandon sat with tense, hopeful faces, like drowning people clinging to one last life raft. It was clear. They had called Jackie obsessively, enough for her to bring Daniel along as some kind of rescue squad. I didn't hurry to speak. I set the pot down, turned off the stove, wiped my hands, and walked to the dining table I had prepared ahead of time. Everything was tidy and formal, like one final ritual before the truth shattered open. "Let's eat," I said softly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear in the silent house. Dinner began with small talk, Jackie asking about my health, Daniel asking about the woodworking shop, Lily pretending to choke up every time I looked her way, but only a few minutes later, their real purpose began to show. "Mom," Jackie said, setting her glass down, looking at me with an expression carefully crafted to appear thoughtful, "I think it's time you considered selling the house. You're living alone in a place this big. It's not suitable anymore." Daniel nodded as if he were some expert on my life. "Besides," he added, "if you sell now, you'll get a great price. You could move into a more comfortable apartment. We'll help you choose." The words came out like a caring suggestion, but they were sharp as a blade. I stayed silent, watching them. I didn't nod or shake my head. I just looked. That silence made both Jackie and Daniel waver slightly, and they kept pushing. And if you sell, Jackie continued, her voice smooth as if she'd rehearsed it all afternoon, you could help us with the down payment on a new house, so our family can stay close. I almost laughed. Before I could respond, Daniel leaned toward me, adding smoothly, either way. Later on, all your assets will go to the kids anyway. Why hold on to so much and stress yourself out? Stress myself out? What did he just say? I heard Lily softly murmur agreement, and Brandon smirked like this was all obvious. And then all the hurt, the collapse, the months of quiet suffering aligned into one straight, steady line running through me. I set my fork down. All right, I said. If you all want to talk seriously, then I have something serious to show you. I stood, walked to my office, and returned with the USB Marcy had given me, the one weapon I knew would tear every mask off the faces sitting around my table. I placed the USB in front of Jackie. Open it. Jackie looked at me, confused. Then she plugged it into her laptop and opened the photo folder. The room died instantly. The first picture, Daniel holding the red-haired woman, their lips almost touching, his hand behind her neck. The second, another angle even clearer, undeniable. The third, the woman's hand wearing a wedding ring. Jackie froze. Her face turned to stone, her lips trembling before going rigid. Daniel went pale, blinking rapidly as if the images might disappear if he denied them long enough. Lily covered her mouth. Brandon swore under his breath, unsure whether to look at me or at Daniel. I folded my arms, my voice calm to the point of cruelty. This is what happened 2 hours before the wedding. Full metadata, exact timestamp, GPS coordinates, real people, real events. Jackie inhaled sharply, choking on air. No way. Daniel, I say something. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face twisting like someone gripping his throat. I straightened up and looked at each of them. We're not done, I said. Let me read the sentence you two said to each other last night. Lily shot to her feet, shouting, Mom, were you eavesdropping? No, I replied. I heard you. You had the speaker on. And I read, word for word. 2 more months and it's done. Smooth divorce. Wedding gifts split 60-40. Mom's old. Easy to fool. No one breathed. No one blinked. Jackie stood so fast her chair crashed backward. Lily, you actually said that where Mom could hear you? Lily stammered. I didn't know Mom. Brandon cursed again, louder this time. I looked at them. 4 people. 4 faces exposing guilt and fear. A family I once thought I had, now reduced to a swamp where each one had tried to drag me under. I placed my hand on the table and said the line I had prepared exactly for this moment. I know you all see me as a wallet, but today, I'm informing you of one thing. 4 sets of eyes turned toward me. All of my assets, my house, my money, my shop, have been moved into a trust, and a trust cannot be sued, cannot be touched, cannot be broken. No one moved. I continued. Later on, by law, each of you will receive the minimum share, not 1 cent more. Jackie nearly collapsed back into her chair. Daniel gripped the edge of the table, white as a sheet. Lily began to cry. Brandon muttered curses, but his voice was shaking. I stood up. Dinner is over. I left behind a table full of cold food and 4 people watching their world collapse in an instant, like walls losing their foundation. I walked into the hallway, feeling as though I had stepped out of a room filled with toxic smoke. Behind me, I heard Jackie sobbing, Daniel mumbling something like an apology, Lily crying out in a mix of desperation and rage. But none of it touched me anymore. In that moment, I understood perfectly. My family didn't fall apart tonight. It fell apart long ago. Tonight. They simply saw what was left of it, clear and bare, like the truth I had laid on the table. The days after that fateful dinner, my house felt like a dying animal thrashing in chaos before it finally surrendered. Every wall, every door seemed to witness something I never imagined facing at 68. Psychological games from the very children I spent my life loving. Lily and Brandon behave like people with nothing left to lose, or who believed that if they pushed hard enough, I would break the way I always had. But they miscalculated. I was no longer the mother who could be manipulated by tears. I'm struggling, or empty promises of a future they never intended to honor. In the first 3 days, their strategy was clear. Noise, disruption, attempts to rattle me. In the morning when I came downstairs, Lily was blasting loud electronic music, making the dishes on the rack tremble. She'd never listened to that genre before, let alone blasted it inside a house with an elderly person. I brewed my coffee as if I heard nothing. Lily glanced at me, challenging. "Doesn't this bother you?" I simply replied, "No." Brandon slammed the door every time he went out, trying to shake the walls. Sometimes he left empty beer cans on the dining table and nudged them to fall, watching me like he was waiting for me to snap, but I said nothing. At night, they tried a different tactic. Lily tried frightening me, flicking hallway lights on and off when I walked through, cracking my door open, then closing it, or sitting in the dark living room whispering things like, "Being alone at your age. Dangerous things can happen." I knew the game. Harold warned me. When exploiters lose control, they will do anything to regain it. Still, I stayed silent. One night, near midnight, Lily stood outside my office door, voice trembling as if she were truly heartbroken. "Mom, I'm sorry, I really am. I don't know what Jackie told you, but I was wrong. Brandon, he controls me. I don't want this." I remained at my desk, pen moving across the page just as Harold instructed. I let her finish, then opened the door. She was crying. Real tears or a perfect imitation. But I'd been Lily's mother her whole life. I knew her inside and out. "What do you want?" I asked. Lily blinked, hesitated only a second. If you give me more time or help with the deposit on a new place, I promise." That was when I cut her off, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. "If you were truly sorry, you would apologize without asking for anything." Lily froze for 2 seconds. Then her face changed entirely, the mask falling like shattered glass. "Fine," she yelled. "Then stay here alone. Brandon's right, you're selfish. Don't blame anyone later." She stormed upstairs, each step pounding with rage. I returned to my desk and wrote, Day 4. Lily shifted from remorse, request money, anger. Failed. Brandon was different. He didn't plead, he threatened. One afternoon, he stood in the kitchen with his arms crossed, blocking my path. "You know what people will say, right?" he growled. "They'll say you kicked your own daughter out. You think you'll live peacefully after that?" I didn't answer. I stepped aside. He mirrored me. I stepped the other way. He blocked again. I met his eyes, my voice firm. "Whether I live peacefully or not is none of your concern." He clenched his jaw, but this time he backed away. Every detail I recorded. Harold said it was vital if they tried to flip the story, claim I was unstable or abusive. I never imagined my daughter and the man she dragged into my home would stoop so low, but that was before I learned the truth. The low point of their desperation came when Jackie sent a text first. "Mom, I'm bringing someone to help you. You're not well. You need an evaluation." Before I could reply, the doorbell rang. A woman in her 50s stood outside, wearing a psychologist's badge, with Jackie beside her. Her face a mix of concern and superiority, like someone preparing to intervene in another person's life, while believing it's for their own good. "Hi, Mom," Jackie said gently, as if she hadn't been exposed with infidelity the night before. "This is Dr. Monroe. I think you're under a lot of stress and need—" I cut her off. "No." Dr. Monroe smiled professionally. "Mrs. Whitford, we only want to determine whether—" "I did not invite you into my home," I said, staring directly at her. "Please leave." Jackie flushed. "You're not acting rational. We just want to make sure you're capable." I opened the door wider, my voice icy. "If you are not off my porch in 3 seconds, I will call the police and report trespassing." Both women froze. Then Dr. Monroe stepped back. Jackie stiffened, saying nothing. I closed the door, not harshly but decisively. In the silence of the house, I heard Lily whisper from the stairs, "What happened? She kicked you out." Jackie hissed back, "Fine, let her destroy herself. Just watch." They left. And for the first time in months, hearing my daughter's voice didn't frighten me. It didn't hurt. It just felt empty, followed by a strange, unexpected sense of relief. In the days that followed, things in the house began breaking in suspicious ways. A picture frame fell. A doorknob was twisted out of alignment. A ceramic vase I had bought 20 years ago was smashed. But instead of getting angry, I picked up my phone, photographed each item, and saved everything into the folder labeled Legal Documents Section B. Every time I pressed the shutter, I felt a little stronger, because I was no longer fighting with emotion. I was fighting with clarity. On the 10th day of the eviction notice, Lily and Brandon finally began packing boxes. Their arguments echoed through the house. Blame, frustration, fear. Lily cried, then screamed. Brandon cursed and pounded on the walls, the thuds shaking the plaster but never breaking the calm I was building for myself inside my office. I closed the door, sat at my desk, turned on the warm lamp, and opened my notebook. New lines flowed steadily across the page. 10th day. They know I've changed. No more negotiating, no more hesitation, no room left for pity that can be exploited. I set my pen down and leaned back. For the first time in many years, I felt serene. Strangely, that serenity came from the deepest place of pain, yet it was also where strength was born. I had exhausted myself by loving the wrong way. Now I was learning to love the right person, myself, and my family, the ones who thought I would endure forever, finally understood. Eleanor Whitford would not be silent anymore, and if I ever chose silence again, it would be a weapon, not a weakness. The 30th day arrived as softly as a breath, yet as heavy as a stone on my chest, not because I was afraid or unsure, but because it was the day I would watch a rotten chapter of my life finally close. I woke at 6 a.m. to the Arizona sunlight slipping through the blinds, painting thin golden stripes across the wooden floor. Today, the house would change. Today, I would change. I made my coffee and set the cup on the table in silence. There were no pounding footsteps on the stairs, no fights erupting in the living room, no beer cans rolling across the floor. It felt like the quiet before a storm, except I no longer feared storms. At exactly 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Harold standing there, immaculate as always, holding a stack of documents. Beside him were 2 Scottsdale police officers, a man around 40, and a woman whose stern eyes softened when she met mine. "Mrs. Whitford," Harold said, "I'll be with you through the entire process. Everything is within the law. No one will give you trouble again." I nodded. In that moment, I felt like two solid walls had risen behind me. We stepped inside. Lily and Brandon had no idea the police were coming. Lily was sprawled on the sofa, hair messy, phone in hand. Brandon was still asleep, crumpled in a blanket like a lazy child. When they saw the officers, Lily shot upright as if doused with cold water. "What is this?" she screamed. Brandon jerked awake, eyes wide, panic flashing into anger in a heartbeat. "What the hell is going on?" The lead officer spoke in a firm but professional tone. "Today is day 30 since the eviction notice was delivered. You both have 2 hours to pack your belongings and leave this property." The room exploded instantly. Lily shrieked, "No, no, no! Mom, you can't do this to me! This is my home! I've lived here for 4 years!" The officer repeated calmly, "There is no rental agreement. This is the homeowner's legal right," and Mrs. Whitford followed every required step. Brandon lunged toward me, pointing a finger in my face. "You're insane! You'll regret this! You think this is right?" Harold stepped forward like a quiet shield. "If you continue threatening her, we are authorized to restrain you." Brandon backed up, still cursing, kicking the wall hard enough to knock plaster loose. Lily collapsed on the couch, sobbing, "Mom, please, I'm not ready. I have nowhere to go." I stood there looking at my daughter, the same child who once held my hand when she feared the dark, the same child who slept on my chest as a baby. But I didn't see that little girl anymore. I saw a woman who had learned to survive through manipulation, draining the mother who gave her everything. "Why are you doing this?" Lily wailed. "Why are you throwing your daughter out?" I inhaled slowly. My heart didn't hurt the way it used to. Now there was only clarity. "Because you threw me out of your heart first," I said, "and I cannot live with people who see me as a wallet." Lily broke into harder sobs, but I didn't move. The officers started the timer. 2 hours. 2 short hours that felt like a lifetime to Lily and Brandon. They ran upstairs, dragging suitcases down, clothes spilling everywhere, shouting at each other. Lily accusing me of cruelty, Brandon pounding on furniture, Lily screaming that I was heartless and ungrateful and not a real mother. I stood in the kitchen, holding my coffee, looking out into the backyard, the same yard where Jackie used to play ball, where my old dog slept in the shade, where I had once planted flowers with my husband. Now it bore witness to a painful but necessary cleansing. I wasn't happy, but I was relieved. Relieved like someone taking off a heavy, suffocating armor they had been forced to wear for 4 years. 2 hours passed. Lily and Brandon came down the stairs with the last of their boxes. Lily's eyes were swollen, mascara streaked across her cheeks. Brandon was trembling with anger. They walked out to the porch and loaded their belongings into Brandon's old brown car. He slammed the trunk hard enough to shake the frame. Lily turned back, hatred and hurt mixing in her eyes. "You're going to live alone for the rest of your life," she said, her voice cracked and venomous. I stood tall, no tears, no trembling. "Better alone," I replied, "than surrounded by people who only use me." Lily yanked the car door open. Brandon started the engine. The old vehicle rumbled out of the driveway and disappeared behind the trees. The officers thanked me and left. Harold shook my hand, firm, steady. "You did the right thing, Eleanor. I'm proud of you." When the door closed, a silence unlike anything I'd heard in years washed over the house. A silence so deep I could hear my own breath. A silence So complete, the ticking clock sounded alive. A silence that finally let me realize this was the first time in 4 years I had the right to peace. I walked to the living room chair, the one I never dared sit in because Brandon claimed it as his spot, and sat down. My face felt cold. My back ached. Then, the tears came. Not because I had lost my children, not because I was hurt, not because I was lonely, but because after 4 years, after dozens of sleepless nights, after having my heart squeezed by betrayal over and over, I finally felt myself return. I had found my way back to who I was. I had chosen myself, and it was the best choice I had ever made. One quiet morning, as I was brewing chamomile tea to start my day, the phone rang. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, painting soft stripes across the walnut countertop I loved so much. Everything felt peaceful, so when the phone buzzed, I sensed the stillness was about to be disturbed. The caller ID read, Jackie. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Not out of fear, because I had broken the habit of rushing in to comfort her every time she was upset. I wanted to respond with the calm I had fought so hard to earn. "When will you stop destroying my family?" Jackie said. No greeting, no breath, just an attack as if I were the cause of every misery in her life. I sat down, hands wrapped around the warm cup. My voice was soft, steady. "Jackie, I'm not destroying your family. I'm simply refusing to let it destroy me." Silence, a few seconds long. I could practically hear Jackie's angry breathing, as if my words wounded her more than anything else could. Then her voice cracked, furious, desperate. "If you hadn't interfered, if you hadn't blown up everything with Daniel, none of this would have happened." I closed my eyes, recalling the photos Marcy had given me, the messages Lily overheard, the months of Jackie letting me pay for everything, every bill, every debt, every mistake. "No, Jackie," I said. "Your marriage fell apart because you and Daniel were using each other for money, not because of me. I wasn't the one cheating 2 hours before the wedding, and I wasn't the one calling me own mother easy to fool." She fell silent again. So long I thought she might have hung up. Then her voice returned, brittle as dry leaves. "You'll regret this, I swear." I simply answered, "I've regretted enough for the past 30 years, Jackie. Now it's time I choose for myself." I was the one who hung up, something I had never done before. A few days later, I was watering the lavender along the back porch when my phone pinged with a message. I wiped my hands and checked it. "Daniel Foster, if you stay quiet about the photos, I'll send you $10,000. I want this resolved fast." I stared at the text, not angry, not shocked, just amused. He thought my dignity, my self-respect, the betrayal of my daughter, his brazen infidelity right before the ceremony were worth $10,000? I pressed block without replying a single word. The phone went still again, as if it too felt relieved to cut off something toxic. Word about the divorce spread faster than I expected. Not because I talked. I hadn't said a single thing to anyone. But people who live by deceit rarely keep secrets well, especially when their lives start breaking apart piece by piece. According to what Harold heard from a colleague who handled divorce cases, Jackie and Daniel's battle resembled a wildfire, furious, chaotic, consuming everything they had tried to build on lies. Jackie accused Daniel of infidelity. Daniel accused Jackie of hiding wedding money. They dragged each other between court and lawyers' offices like two drunk strangers fighting in the street. The wedding gifts, $47,000 from people who trusted them, evaporated like steam. It all turned into legal fees, court costs, investigative expenses, and other pointless attempts to prove the other one was worse. In the end, they were left with nothing but resentment and two empty skies. And I? I watched from afar, not bitter, not pleased, simply detached, as though I were watching a play that once threatened to drown me, but now I had stepped off the stage entirely. One evening, I sat on the porch with a light shawl over my shoulders, watching the sunset burn the sky orange. I turned on the warm lights along the stone path, lavender scent drifting in the breeze. For the first time in ages, I truly felt alive, not surviving, but living. I placed my hand over my chest, where my heart still beat steadily, strongly. I no longer felt heavy when thinking of Jackie. I no longer hurt when thinking of Lily. I no longer blamed myself for giving too much. I felt only one simple truth. Freedom is worth more than anything, more than expectations, more than the weight of motherhood, more than the fear of loneliness they used to control me. Freedom is knowing I don't owe my life to anyone. Freedom is standing up and walking out of the dark without waiting for someone to pull me. Freedom is choosing peace, choosing myself, choosing a path free of those who see me as property. And as the sky turned purple, I smiled. A real smile, one that made my eyes sting just a little. I had lost much, but I had found the most precious thing again, myself. Eleanor Whitford, a woman who finally understood that sacrifice is not destiny. It is a choice, and starting today, I choose freedom. 3 weeks passed after Lily and Brandon left the house, and what surprised me most wasn't their absence, but the absence of the noise they carried with them. The house was so spacious I could hear the wind slipping through the door frame, the wood expanding and contracting with the change in temperature, and even the echo of my own footsteps across the clean wooden floor. For 4 years, I hadn't realized how beautiful those sounds were, gentle, honest, and untouched by resentment, demands, or disrespect. I lived alone, and for the first time in my life, alone didn't mean lonely. The first morning after they left, I woke at 7 a.m., went down to the kitchen, and stood there for quite a while. The coffee machine Brandon had dropped countless times stood intact on the counter, gleaming under the sunlight. I placed a coffee pot in, pressed the button, and listened to the steady hum of the machine, without fearing someone would yank the plug or shout about needing the stove, or complain about anything except maybe that the coffee would brew, a little stronger than I liked. That small piece made me laugh, a real laugh, soft as smoke, one that felt like it had been asleep inside me for years. On the third day, I took out the paintbrush set my husband had given me in 1985, a gift I had never truly used. Back then, life was too busy. Then came the children, then the store, then his illness. And I pushed my own interests aside as if they were luxuries I didn't deserve. I sat at the dining table, spread out the paper, set the palette. Sunlight passed through the window and shimmered across the watercolors like pieces of glass. For the first time in 4 decades, I dipped a brush into blue and touched it to paper. The first stroke trembled, the second steadied, the third, my mind finally let go. I painted the backyard, the lemon tree my husband planted when Jackie was born, the wooden chair where I used to read to Lily. Everything appeared imperfect, proportionally wrong, yet painfully true. When I finished, I didn't cry. I simply placed my hand over my heart and felt a gentle easing ripple outward like circles on water. I had returned to myself, the woman I was before I drowned under duty and endless sacrifice. A week later, I joined a woodworking repair class for older adults at the community center. I had always thought I only knew how to run a store, that working with tools was men's work. But standing before a piece of wood, holding a chisel, hearing fibers split under my hands, it made me feel stronger than I ever had. In the class was Margaret, 82, a cheerful widow who loved telling stories about her late husband. Philip, a veteran with slightly trembling hands but unwavering patience. And Laura, 50, newly divorced and learning how to begin again. I sat among them holding a light mallet and realized I wasn't lost. I wasn't left behind. I belonged here. None of them knew my story, and I didn't need to tell it. We shared through laughter, through borrowing sandpaper, through lifting each other up when a piece of wood broke the wrong way. That evening, I returned home with the scent of fresh lumber on my hands and a heart full of energy. In the second week, I decided to renovate the kitchen, a task I should have done long ago but kept postponing out of fear of inconveniencing the freeloaders living under my roof. I bought new wall cabinets, a power screwdriver, a measuring tape, and a roll of vinyl covering. The store clerk was shocked I intended to do it myself. It took me 2 days to remove the old cabinets, sand the surfaces, measure carefully, and install each unit. At times, I was so tired I had to sit on the floor, but the feeling of rebuilding my own home kept lifting me back to my feet. When I mounted the final cabinet, I leaned against the counter, sweat sliding down my temple, and thought, Eleanor, you were never old. You were just held down by people who dragged you under. In that moment, I felt young again, not in age, but in spirit. That weekend, Harold emailed, "Your trust is complete. Your assets are fully protected. No one can alter or dispute anything." I read those lines 3 times. Each time felt like placing another solid stone beneath the foundation of my new life. I no longer had to fear Jackie suing. I no longer had to fear Lily demanding a share of the house. I no longer had to fear Daniel returning with lies. I no longer had to fear losing everything I had spent my life building. I sat quietly, then burst into a long, clear laugh, the kind I couldn't remember producing in years. That afternoon, while I was sorting my paintbrushes, the phone rang. Marcy Donald's, the photographer who helped me see the truth. I answered. Her voice was warm, slightly hesitant. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about you these past weeks, wondering if you're all right. You said you'd check in. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." I looked at the half-finished painting on my table, blue sky strokes and soft lavender. I smiled. "I'm all right, Marcy. Actually, I'm better than ever." She exhaled in relief. "I'm so glad to hear that." I picked up my car keys. "Marcy," I said, my voice carrying a sincerity even I could recognize as new. "I owe you a thank you. You helped me escape a life that was going in the wrong direction. Are you free for coffee? My treat." On the other end, she laughed, simple and warm as late afternoon sunlight. "I'd love that." I hung up. I looked around my house, for the first time completely mine. I looked at my life, for the first time completely my own. I grabbed my purse, stepped outside, and took a deep, full breath. Freedom isn't just the absence of chains. Freedom is when your heart feels light enough to lift. And I, Eleanor Whitford, was beginning to lift. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the thin scarf around my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I saw no fear or exhaustion in my eyes. Instead, I saw clarity, ease, and something I thought I had lost: respect for myself. 3 months earlier, I had been a mother used, cornered, treated like a walking wallet. I endured, bent myself in half, convinced that was what a mother must do, that love meant unconditional sacrifice. But betrayal and cruelty from the very people I raised taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago. Love does not include allowing others to destroy you. Sacrifice is not a mother's destiny. Boundaries are part of love, not the opposite of it. When I drew my first boundary, I thought I would collapse. Instead, it held me up. I went from a woman trembling when her daughter mocked her, old and easy to fool, to the woman who stood tall at her doorway and said clearly, "You have 30 days to leave." I went from someone heartbroken by her son-in-law cheating on the wedding day to someone who placed a USB on the table and revealed the truth without a hint of hesitation. I went from someone who believed life after 60 was nothing but waiting to someone rewriting her life at 68 with new colors, new joy, and new self-respect. Looking back, I realized something important. I was never alone. There was Marcy, the woman who stayed up late to send me the photos that changed my life. There was Harold, the calm, persistent attorney who handed me the legal shield that protected my future. There were neighbors who left bread on my porch or asked if I needed help fixing a faucet. There were strangers who smiled when they saw me carrying a basket of flowers, as if they sensed the lighter steps beneath my feet. I once thought I was left with an empty house, but really, I had a small world full of quiet kindness, one I had been too drained to notice before. I slipped my purse over my shoulder. Inside were only my wallet, my phone, and the small notebook where I recorded my healing. I locked the door, stepped onto the porch, and when I opened the garage, the Scottsdale sunlight poured in, bright and pure. After many years, I was about to walk into my first coffee outing, not a tense family meeting, not a stressful appointment with a lawyer, but a simple, sincere invitation. A meeting to say thank you, a meeting to open the door to a new chapter. I looked up at the sky, wide and blue. White clouds drifted gently like clean pages, and the breeze carried the scent of desert dust and the lavender blooming at my doorstep. I smiled, a real smile rising from the deepest part of me. I whispered, "The rest of my life is mine, and no one else's." And I believed it with everything inside me. After more than 40 years of being a mother, a wife, a woman carrying the world for everyone else, I had forgotten something simple. I also deserved a life of my own. Today, at 68, I stepped into the sunlight with weightless feet, as if I had just been freed after years imprisoned by expectations and unspoken obligations. The Scottsdale sky was so blue it felt like I was staring at an unwritten map, not one to follow, but one I would draw myself. I closed the garage door, held the car keys, but paused for a few seconds just to breathe, not to gather courage, but to savor the rare feeling of full autonomy. A new chapter begins not with thunder or shouting or the crash of broken things, but with the soft sound of my own footsteps on the concrete, leading me to the place I should have reached long ago. I opened the car door. I stepped in. I smiled. A new life, unburdened, unblamed, free from the shadows of exploitation, was unfolding right before me, and I knew I was ready. Thank you for staying with me all the way to these final lines of my journey. If you're listening to my story, perhaps somewhere in your own life you've had a crossroads too, a moment when you had to stand up and protect yourself even while your heart was still bleeding. At any age, we all deserve peace, respect, and a life that belongs to us. I would love to know, where are you watching this from? Did any part of my journey remind you of your own or make you reflect on something in your past? Feel free to share in the comments. Your story might become the strength someone else needs to rise again. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, awakening boundaries, and rediscovering yourself after years of sacrifice, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next stories. I'm truly grateful to have you here, because sometimes just one more person listening can make someone's whole world feel warmer. I was sitting in the cardiology waiting room when my phone vibrated. We're leaving the U.S. tomorrow morning. I sold the lake house and Dad's watch. I need the money. Don't call me anymore. I read the message 3 times. My hands went cold. My heart started racing. The 71-year-old woman reflected in the glass across from me looked like she had just lost another loved one for the second time in less than half a year. I jumped to my feet, dropping my entire folder of medical records. The nurse called my name, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. My daughter had just sold my entire life with a single text message, and in that moment, I decided to do something she would never expect. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Helen Brooks, 71 years old, a widow. I live alone in a small house in northern Seattle, where mornings are often drizzled with rain and the smell of freshly roasted coffee drifts in from the corner cafe through the window. I've lived in this city for more than 40 years, long enough to get used to the rain, long enough to believe that some things in life are solid, that they can't be taken away by a single impulsive decision. Richard, my husband, believed that too. We married very young. 45 years of marriage were not always smooth, but they were 45 years built on trust. Richard was a careful man, worked in finance his entire life, the kind of person who always read every line of fine print before signing anything. I was different. I trusted people. I trusted my husband. I trusted my child. I believed family was the safest place to let your guard down. Richard died 6 months ago on a winter morning so cold it went numb to the bone. The heart attack came too fast. I remember that evening clearly. I sat alone in the living room, the armchair he always used, still holding a trace of his warmth, the heavy metal watch he had worn for decades resting on the table, its hands still moving steadily, as if nothing had changed. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how something so small could measure an entire lifetime. Lauren, our only daughter, stayed with me during the first weeks after the funeral. She came often, cooked, cleaned, asked about my health. I thought that in the greatest loss of my life, at least I still had my child. At least I wouldn't have to face old age alone. Until that message. In the waiting room that day, everything around me continued as usual. An elderly couple whispered about test results. A middle-aged man read the newspaper. The number calling machine beeped steadily, and I sat among them, suddenly feeling like an outsider, as if I had just been pushed out of the world I knew. I bent down to pick up the medical file that had fallen at my feet. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grab the chair to steady myself. The nurse called my name again, her voice slightly raised with concern. I shook my head gently, said I wasn't feeling well, and asked to reschedule. I couldn't lie on the exam table right now. I couldn't let the doctor listen to my heart when I didn't even know whether it was beating from illness or from pain. After leaving the clinic, I sat down on a bench in the hallway, breathing deeply like someone about to faint. I opened the message again, the same lines, no emojis, no apology, no, I love you, Mom, just a notification. Cold, clean, final. I called Lauren, 1 ring, 2 rings, then voicemail. I called again and again. On the 4th attempt, she picked up, her voice irritated. Why do you keep calling, Mom? I swallowed hard. Lauren, what did you mean in that message? What did you sell? You can't... Mom, I'm busy. Ethan and I are getting ready to go. Just calm down. Calm down? I heard my own voice crack. That's your parents' house and that watch. You don't need those things anymore, she cut me off. You don't go to the lake much now. The watch just sits in a drawer. You don't even use it. I needed the money urgently, that's all. You can't just do that, I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. That's family property. That's your father's keepsake. There was a very brief pause on the other end. Then Lauren sighed, like someone being patient with a stubborn child. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. You have a house in Seattle now. That's enough. I have to hang up. The taxi's almost here. Lauren, wait. The call ended. I sat there for a long time. People walked past me, but no one saw me. I felt ashamed, not because something private had been exposed, but because of something deeper. The feeling of being pushed aside, of being treated as no longer important. At this age, people fear loneliness. But there is another fear, quieter and deeper, the fear of becoming invisible within your own family. The lake house Lauren mentioned is in eastern Washington, where Richard and I spent almost every summer for 30 years. It wasn't a luxury villa, just a 2-story wooden house overlooking a calm lake, where Richard taught Lauren how to fish, where I planted lavender by the porch, where every evening we drank tea and watched the water change color at sunset. We bought it after 15 years of saving, thinking of it as our shared dream for old age. And the watch. The watch Richard wore from the day Lauren was born. The glass slightly scratched, the metal band worn in places, but he never took it off. Time is the only thing that waits for no one, he used to say. I had thought that after he died, the watch would be passed down to our daughter as a piece of memory, a reminder of the father she once loved so deeply. I left the clinic and drove home in a dazed state. Seattle rain fell steadily on the windshield. Every familiar turn suddenly felt strange. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat down in Richard's armchair, the blanket he used still folded there. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. For the first time since Richard died, I cried out loud, not because I lost my husband, but because I felt discarded by my own daughter, as if all those years of being a wife, a mother, the one who held the family together, could be reduced to a few bank transfers. I thought I had lost everything, the lake house, my husband's keepsake, my savings, and more than anything, I thought I had just lost my only child. But as I stood up to get some water, my eyes landed on the filing cabinet in Richard's office. The cabinet he always kept locked. The cabinet he had once held my hand and said very seriously, "Helen, if anything happens, remember to keep the documents in here safe. Don't give them to anyone, not even Lauren, until you truly need them." At the time, I had just nodded to reassure him. I had never opened the bottom drawer. I had never thought I would need to. Until that night. I stood in front of the filing cabinet for a long time, my hand resting on the cold lock. Part of me still wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that Lauren would call back, apologize, say it was a rushed decision. But another part of me, the part that had lived 71 years, the part that had learned to read dangerous silences in other people's words, whispered that maybe I hadn't lost everything after all, and maybe Richard had seen this long before I ever did. I sat in front of the filing cabinet for a long time that night, but in the end, I didn't open it. Not because I was afraid, but because another memory suddenly flooded back, so vivid it made me lean back in the chair to keep from collapsing. It was the days right after Richard's funeral. I remember that morning clearly. Seattle was gray, the rain light but relentless, the kind that exhausts you more than a downpour. The house, packed with people the day before, suddenly felt unbearably empty. The wreaths were gone. The condolences had been spoken. All that remained was me and an endless silence. Lauren arrived early. She wore a light beige coat, her hair neatly tied back, little makeup on her face, but she looked exhausted. When she stepped inside, she hugged me tightly. It had been a long time since I'd felt that hug, familiar yet distant, warm yet painful. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked softly, full of concern. I nodded, though I was not okay at all. I don't remember what I said during those days. Everything felt like it happened behind a fog. I barely ate, barely slept, and kept forgetting the simplest things. At one point, I stood in the kitchen unable to remember why I had opened the refrigerator. Lauren stayed almost the entire day. She cleaned, gathered papers, sorted mail, sometimes making me a cup of hot tea and placing it in my hands the way Richard used to. Each time, my nose burned with unshed tears. I thought my daughter was stepping in for her father, taking on what he had left behind. That afternoon, as I sat in the armchair staring out the window, Lauren brought me a stack of papers. She placed them neatly on the coffee table and sat across from me, her eyes so gentle that I felt no suspicion at all. "Mom," she said, "I think we should organize the paperwork. Dad is gone and you can't leave things messy like this. These are just some asset management forms, so I can help you handle things and you won't have to worry." I looked at the papers, then at Lauren. In that moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to bring her homework to us, eyes full of hope. I didn't ask questions. I didn't have the strength to. "You're doing this for me?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Lauren nodded. "Yes, you just need to sign. It's only a formality. I'll take care of everything." I remember clearly how it felt to hold the pen. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from exhaustion. Exhaustion from grief, from loss, from thinking. I flipped through a few pages, dense with legal terms that Richard always used to read for me. My head was buzzing. "Are you sure this is okay?" I asked, more out of habit than suspicion. Lauren smiled and placed her hand over mine. "You trust me, right?" I nodded, and I signed. I signed page after page. I don't remember how many signatures, only that every time I put the pen down, I thought of Richard. I thought that if he were alive, he would do this for me. And since he wasn't, I let my daughter do it. In the days that followed, Lauren continued to visit often. She asked what I needed, reminded me to take my medication on time, even stayed overnight a few times because she was worried I'd be lonely. I thought that in this loss, at least I still had my child, until the message in the cardiology waiting room. All the scattered pieces suddenly fit together in a painfully clear way. Those signatures, the stack of papers, the phrase, "just a formality," and now the lake house and Richard's watch being sold, legally. That night, after crying myself dry, I called Lauren again. This time she answered immediately, but her voice was completely different. No gentleness, no concern. "Why are you still calling?" She sighed. "It's all done." "Lauren," I said, forcing my voice steady, "the papers you had me sign after the funeral, what were they?" There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but long enough for me to know I had touched something real. "I told you asset management paperwork," she replied, less patient. "You signed them." "Management or power of attorney?" I asked, my heart pounding so hard I had to sit down on the bed. Lauren didn't answer right away. Then she said casually, as if stating the obvious, "Full power of attorney, otherwise I couldn't do anything." I closed my eyes. A wave of dizziness hit me. "You used that power to sell the house and Dad's watch?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I had the legal right. You signed." I bit my lip. What I felt wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. Humiliation that I had let myself end up here. Humiliation that I had trusted my daughter completely at my weakest moment. "Do you know what state I'm in right now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I just lost your father. I wasn't in my right mind to read those documents." Lauren was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I know you're sad, but that's unrelated. Everyone has to keep living, Mom." That sentence froze me. Not because of what it said, but because of how it was said. This wasn't a daughter comforting her mother. It was a stranger cutting off emotion. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling a vast distance open between Lauren and me, a distance I had never noticed before. When the call ended, I looked around the room. Familiar objects suddenly felt foreign. I realized that Lauren's care after the funeral might not have come purely from love. It might have been part of a plan prepared in advance. The thought made me shudder. I remembered Lauren's eyes when she handed me those papers, the gentle smile, the trusting touch. All of it now replayed in my mind like a carefully staged performance. And I, drowning in grief, had walked onto that stage without knowing it. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of the child I had given birth to, not afraid of further harm that had already happened, but afraid because I realized I no longer knew who my daughter was. The child I once carried, taught to walk and speak, trusted to be my emotional anchor in old age, could calmly take the most precious things from me and call it necessary. I sat in my bedroom for a long time that night, the soft yellow lamp casting light on our wedding photo on the wall. Richard was smiling in the picture, that familiar smile tightening my chest. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I whispered, as if he could hear me. And for the first time, I began to wonder, if Richard had been so careful his entire life, would he really have left everything in our daughter's hands, based solely on a few signatures from a woman shattered by grief? The next morning, I woke up early despite barely sleeping. Seattle was still gray, misty rain clinging to the front steps. I made a cup of coffee but only managed a few sips before setting it down. One thought filled my mind. I needed to know what I had left, not to plan the future, but to face the truth, no matter how cruel it was. The bank Richard and I had used for decades was less than 10 minutes from my house. I knew the route so well I could drive it without thinking. But that morning, everything felt different. I gripped the steering wheel, my palms damp with sweat, my heart pounding as if each beat dragged a stone behind it. When I stepped into the bank lobby, I caught my reflection in the large glass doors. An old woman, shoulders slightly hunched, dark circles under her eyes, barely resembling the person I was a few months earlier. When Richard was alive, he used to joke that I always stayed calm no matter what happened. At that moment, I couldn't find that calm anywhere. The young teller smiled as I handed over my card and documents, a polite, professional smile. Nothing unusual. I sat down in the chair across from her, resting my hands on the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd like to check the balances on the accounts in my name," I said. She nodded and typed quickly on the keyboard. I watched her fingers move and suddenly felt short of breath. In that moment, I still held onto a thin, fragile hope that Lauren had only taken part of it, that things hadn't gone as far as the worst possibility. The teller stopped typing. The smile on her lips slowed for a beat, then faded into hesitation. She looked up at me and something like sympathy flickered in her eyes. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, "the current balance is very low." I swallowed. How low is very low? She turned the screen toward me. I looked at the numbers, my mind going blank. Nearly all of the savings Richard and I had built were gone. Large withdrawals, one after another, only days apart. The name on the transactions, Lauren Brooks. "Is there some kind of mistake?" I asked, even though I knew the question was pointless. She shook her head, her voice still carefully gentle. "All transactions were completed under a valid power of attorney. According to our records, your daughter had full authority to manage your assets." I leaned back in the chair, feeling as if I no longer had the strength to sit upright. "So, there's nothing left?" She looked at me again, this time unable to hide her compassion. "You still have a small amount in your daily checking account, but most of the assets have been transferred out." I don't remember how I said thank you. I only remember standing up, stepping away from the counter, walking past people waiting their turn. Someone looked at me, maybe because I looked so pale. I lowered my head, unable to look back. Outside, the Seattle rain hit my face head on. I stood there for a while, not opening my umbrella, letting the cold drops run down my hair, down my collar. It felt like a punishment, and I didn't avoid it. For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of being poor. Not because I truly was poor, but because I had been turned into someone with nothing in the middle of my own life. At this age, people talk about rest, about comfort. And there I was, standing in front of the familiar bank, suddenly feeling like an unnecessary burden, an old woman pushed aside when she no longer had any use. I drove home in a numb haze. Every sound around me felt distorted. Traffic lights, car horns, everything blurred past. When I got home, I sat down in Richard's armchair, the same chair I had sat in for so long the night before, and this time, I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands on my knees, staring straight into empty space. Abandoned old age isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with shouting or shoving. It comes quietly, with a text message, a signature, a line of numbers at the bank. And when you realize it, you're standing alone in a familiar room, wondering where you're supposed to go next. That afternoon, I decided to find a lawyer, not because I was sure I would win, but because I couldn't sit still. I searched online and chose a small law office near downtown. The lawyer was young, only a few years into practice, described as handling civil cases and family assets. His office was on the second floor of an old building. The staircase was narrow, the yellow light dim. I climbed each step, feeling as though I were walking backward through my own life, returning to the starting point of helplessness. The young lawyer's name was Mark. He stood up to shake my hand when I entered. He looked very young compared to me, probably around Lauren's age. His eyes were serious, not overly eager, and that made me feel slightly more at ease. I told him everything, from Richard's funeral to the stack of papers Lauren gave me, to the text message in the cardiology waiting room and the cold numbers at the bank. I didn't embellish or hide anything. When I spoke about signing those papers while overwhelmed by grief, my voice grew hoarse, but I didn't stop. Mark listened carefully, sometimes taking notes, sometimes nodding. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "I'll be direct. The documents you signed, if they were indeed a full power of attorney, and if there's no evidence you were coerced or legally incapacitated at the time, then from a legal standpoint, your daughter acted within the law." I closed my eyes. "So, there's nothing I can do?" "It's not that there's nothing," he said cautiously. "We could try to sue, arguing that you signed while under severe emotional distress after the funeral. But suing your own child is extremely difficult. Courts usually require very clear evidence. And even if you won, the process could take many years." Many years. I repeated the phrase in my mind. At 71, many years felt like a luxury I wasn't sure I had. I didn't know how much time remained or whether I had the strength to pursue a long legal battle. "I understand," I said quietly. Mark looked at me with sympathy. "I don't want to give you false hope. I just want you to be prepared." I nodded and stood up. When I stepped out of his office, I felt a deep emptiness. The thin hope I had carried with me there had been worn down to almost nothing. I went down the stairs, each step heavy. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. I stood on the sidewalk watching people pass by. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, something to do, and I didn't know where I was headed. That night, I didn't turn on the living room lights. I sat in the darkness with only the streetlight shining through the window. Despair crept in, slowly but persistently. I thought about how I would live if I truly had nothing left. I thought about bills, medication, the years ahead, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of the future. It was in that moment that one of Richard's words suddenly echoed in my mind, startlingly clear. "My dear," he had once said on an ordinary evening, "never put all your eggs in one basket. Trusting people is good, but you always need an exit." I opened my eyes and looked toward the filing cabinet in Richard's office. Those words, which I once heard without much thought, suddenly carried heavy meaning. Richard wasn't a man who spoke carelessly. If he had told me to keep those documents safe, if he had spoken of an exit, then maybe this wasn't the end. For the first time since leaving the bank, I felt my heart beat differently. No longer panicked, no longer numb. Just a slow, steady rhythm, as if waiting for something to be revealed. I stood up and walked toward the filing cabinet. In my mind, Richard's words continued to echo, like a reminder, like a thin thread pulling me back from the edge of despair. I stood in front of the filing cabinet for a long time, then turned and walked toward the bedroom instead. Not because I had forgotten Richard's words, but because the memory of the envelope he left suddenly became clearer than any document in the cabinet. It was 3 days before Richard died. That afternoon, the weather was unusually sunny. Soft light filtered through the curtains and fell along the edge of the hospital bed where he lay. Richard had grown very thin, his face hollow, but his eyes were strangely clear. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, trying not to think about what both of us were avoiding. Richard softly called my name. When I leaned closer, he pulled a dark brown envelope from under his pillow, thick paper carefully sealed along the edges. He placed it in my hand and held it tighter than necessary, as if afraid I might let go. "Helen," he said slowly, his voice weak but steady, "put this in your jewelry box. Don't let anyone see it." I was surprised. "What is it?" He looked at me for a long time. That look wasn't from someone about to leave, but from someone trying to protect something for the future. "Only open it when things go wrong," he said, "when you feel like you're no longer in control." I was about to ask more, but Richard gently shook his head. "I hope you'll never have to open it." At the time, I thought it was just the over-caution of a man who had spent his life calculating. I nodded, placed the envelope into the old oak jewelry box where I kept my wedding ring, necklaces, the things that carried more emotional value than monetary worth. And then I forgot about it, completely forgot, until now. That night, after remembering Richard's words, I opened the jewelry box. The familiar smell of old wood rose up, carrying decades of memories. Beneath the necklaces and earrings I rarely touched, the envelope was still there, undisturbed, unfaded, as if waiting for me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The seal was still intact. Richard had closed it carefully. In that moment, I felt afraid, not of what was inside, but of the feeling that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. I sat down on the bed, leaned against the headboard, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly organized stack of papers and a handwritten letter. Richard's handwriting, strong, familiar, slightly slanted to the right, the handwriting I had looked at for 45 years. Just seeing it made my chest tighten. I opened the letter first. "My beloved Helen." The first line blurred my vision. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side, and perhaps what I feared has come true. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and kept reading. Richard wrote that, over his lifetime of work, he had learned one thing. Not every risk comes from outside. Some risks live within the family, within relationships that seem the safest. He didn't write much, didn't explain at length, only that he had observed Lauren for many years, and there were things that kept him from feeling completely at ease. "Love for a child is not blind," he wrote. "It must be paired with clarity." A sharp pain pierced my chest, not from being betrayed again, but from realizing Richard had carried this worry alone, without telling me, perhaps afraid I would be hurt, afraid I wouldn't be able to bear it. Richard went on to explain that in his later years, he had quietly prepared another plan, not to hide things from me, but to protect me in the worst-case scenario. He called it Plan B and emphasized that it existed only because he loved me, not because he didn't trust our daughter. I set the letter down for a moment. wiped my tears, and opened the stack of papers beneath it. Lines of text, numbers, and company names appeared before my eyes, so confusing at first that I couldn't grasp them all. But the more I read, the more I understood the scale of what Richard had done. There were property ownership certificates under the name of a limited liability company I had never heard of. There were reports of stocks and bonds invested many years earlier. There were bank statements from 2 different financial institutions, all in my name, but with passwords and access only Richard had known. I sat there for a long time, turning page after page, my heart pounding harder with each line. These weren't small amounts. This was wealth accumulated carefully, invested strategically over many years. Richard had built a financial foundation I had never imagined. I wasn't poor at all. In fact, I was far wealthier than I had ever thought. But what stunned me most wasn't the numbers. It was a separate file, clipped with a metal fastener at the bottom of the stack. On the cover, in Richard's handwriting, were a few simple words: Real Estate Seattle. I opened it, and my heart nearly stopped. They were the ownership documents for the upscale apartment building where Lauren and her husband were living. The address was clear, unmistakable. The legal owner, a company Richard had established years ago. The final beneficiary, me. I had to read it several times before I believed it. Lauren had always told me the apartment was the result of smart investing, that she and her husband had built it on their own. I had believed her. I had been proud of my daughter. I never imagined that Richard, so quietly, had been the one behind it all. I sat motionless, the envelope spread open on the bed, my mind spinning. Every scattered piece suddenly fell into place in a way that was both painful and clarifying. Richard had known. He had seen the signs I ignored. Lauren's impatience when it came to money, how easily she dismissed emotional values. The questions that seemed harmless but always circled assets and ownership. Richard hadn't jumped to conclusions, but he hadn't looked away either. I remembered the rare moments when Richard mentioned Lauren and his voice grew noticeably lower. She's smart, he once said, but sometimes too impatient. At the time, I brushed it off, assuming it was just a generational difference. Now I understood. It was the concern of a father who had seen much farther than I ever did. I picked up the letter again and read the final lines. Helen, if you are reading this far, I hope you won't blame our daughter. And you won't blame yourself either. People only reveal who they truly are when opportunity stands before them. I didn't prepare these things to punish anyone, but to give you a choice. You can take back control of your life, or you can continue to trust if that is what you choose. The decision is yours. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. Tears fell, but this time they were no longer tears of helplessness. They were tears of understanding. Richard didn't leave me just assets. He left me a position, a foundation, a way out when everything collapsed. I looked around the familiar room where I once believed I had lost everything. The darkness was still there, but it no longer pressed down on me. Inside me, another feeling began to take shape. Not anger, not quite resolve, but a cool, steady clarity. I understood that if Richard had gone this far to protect me, then my role was not to fall apart. And if Lauren had chosen her path, then I would have to choose mine. I carefully gathered the documents, slipped them back into the envelope, and returned it to the jewelry box. My hands no longer trembled as they had when I first opened it. My heartbeat was slow, even, certain. That night, I didn't go to sleep right away. I sat by the window, watching the rain begin to fall again on the rooftops of Seattle. And for the first time since receiving that text message in the cardiology waiting room, I no longer felt like someone who had nothing left. Richard had seen through our daughter very early on, and now it was my turn to face that truth head on. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind felt strangely clear. The dizziness and panic of the previous days had receded, replaced by something else, cold, sharp, and solid. I brewed coffee and opened the curtains, letting Seattle's pale gray light flood the room. Everything was the same as before, yet inside me, a new order was forming. I called Daniel Wright that very morning. Daniel had been Richard's personal lawyer for more than 20 years, a man in his early 60s, hair graying early, voice low and unhurried, the kind of person who never spoke more than necessary. Richard trusted him completely. I remembered once joking that if the whole world lied to us, Daniel would be the last person left telling the truth. When I said my name, he was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the line. "Helen," he said finally, his voice lowered, "I suppose you've opened the envelope." I closed my eyes. "You knew?" "I didn't know when," he replied, "but I knew you would call." We arranged to meet at his office that afternoon. I carried the brown envelope with me, placing it carefully in my handbag as if it were something precious. On the way there, I didn't feel the trembling I'd felt going to the bank or the young lawyer's office the day before. This time, I knew where I was going. Daniel's office was in an old building near downtown. Unassuming, no flashy sign. Inside, everything was tidy to the point of simplicity. Daniel stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. "You look different," he said, meeting my eyes. "I feel it too," I replied, and it wasn't just politeness. I handed him the envelope. Daniel opened it and reviewed each document, each statement, each certificate. He didn't look surprised, only nodded occasionally as if confirming something he had known for a long time. "Everything is legal," he said at last, sliding the papers back toward me. "Richard handled this very carefully. No gaps." "The building where Lauren is living?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Belongs to you," Daniel said firmly, "completely and without dispute." I took a deep breath. Part of me still wasn't used to hearing it spoken aloud. "So, what Lauren did?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced. "Legally speaking, your daughter exploited the power of attorney you signed, but you have the right to revoke that authority at any time, and for the assets beyond her reach, you have full control." I looked down at my hands. They were old, skin-thin, blue veins visible, but I no longer felt they were as weak as before. "I don't want to make a scene," I said. "I don't want loud lawsuits or neighbors gossiping." Daniel gave a faint smile. Richard thought the same way. We agreed almost immediately on one thing: silence. No confrontation, no warnings, no accusations, not yet. Everything would be handled through documents, signatures, and time. Daniel began drafting the necessary paperwork. The first step was revoking the power of attorney I had given Lauren, a concise, clear document that would take effect as soon as it was notarized and delivered to the relevant parties. Daniel assured me Lauren would no longer be able to conduct any transactions on my behalf. Next came transferring full control of all accounts, properties, and investments back into my name, exactly as Richard had arranged. Daniel handled each step quietly and efficiently, leaving no unnecessary trace. All I had to do was sign, and this time I read every line, every word, slowly and fully aware. "There's no need to rush," Daniel said when he saw me pause over a paragraph. "We have time." Strangely, hearing that almost made me smile. For days, I had lived with the feeling of being cornered, as if time were working against me. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was setting the pace. We also prepared a legal notice for Lauren, not a personal letter, not an explanation, just an official document stating that the power of attorney had been revoked and that any further transactions involving my assets were no longer valid. Daniel suggested we not send it immediately. "Let her continue her trip," he said. "The longer, the better." I understood. Lauren was somewhere out there, enjoying the money from selling the lake house, the money from Richard's watch, perhaps sitting on a sunny beach, believing everything was settled. I didn't want to shatter that illusion just yet. Leaving Daniel's office, I felt a strange calm, not triumph, not bitterness, just calm, like straightening a crooked table without anyone noticing, knowing only I could feel it stand firm again. In the days that followed, I continued living as before. I went grocery shopping, greeted neighbors, answered polite questions about how Lauren was doing lately. I smiled and said she was taking a few weeks off to clear her head. No one suspected a thing. I was still Helen Brooks, the quiet widow, living modestly, perhaps a little pitiful in others' eyes. In the evenings, I sat in the living room, turned on Richard's old table lamp, read or listened to the radio. Sometimes I looked at the empty space in the armchair across from me where Richard used to sit, and I silently thanked him, not for the assets, but for the preparation. He hadn't left me defenseless after he was gone. Lauren texted occasionally, not much, just a few short messages, about the trip, the hotel, the new opportunities Ethan was discussing. I replied slowly with neutral sentences, no accusations, no probing questions. I knew every reply reinforced the image Lauren trusted, a mother who had accepted her fate. It was strange how easy it was to play myself, but a weaker, more helpless version, maybe because I had lived in that role for weeks already. Lauren didn't notice the change because it didn't need to be visible. Daniel called regularly to update me. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Accounts secured, assets transferred, documents ready, waiting only for the right moment. "Are you sure you want to wait?" Daniel asked during one call. "We can send the notice at any time." "I'm sure," I said. "I'm not in a hurry." In truth, I was waiting for Lauren to return, not because I wanted to witness my daughter's collapse, but because I believed some lessons can only be learned when someone touches the ground again after flying too high. One night, I stood by the window, watching city lights reflect on rain-slick streets. I thought of the early days of my marriage to Richard, when we had almost nothing except the belief that if we worked hard and lived decently, things would turn out fine. I thought of Lauren as a little girl, holding my hand on the way to school, believing I could fix everything. Now, I wasn't seeking justice through tears. I wasn't begging. I wasn't complaining. I chose the path Richard had left for me, the path of silence, law, and patience. And in that silence, I knew something had begun to shift beneath the surface. That morning, Seattle's sky was a dense gray like frosted glass. I was in the kitchen pouring hot water into the teapot when the doorbell rang. Not the hesitant ring of a delivery person, nor the familiar rhythm of a neighbor. It was urgent, insistent, as if the person outside feared that if they stopped for even a second, their entire world would collapse. I knew immediately who it was. I didn't rush. I set the teapot down, dried my hands with the old cloth Richard used to use, and then walked slowly to the door. In that moment, I realized my heart wasn't racing. No trembling, no nerves, just a strange stillness. When I opened the door, Lauren was standing there. She looked nothing like the travel photos she had sent weeks earlier. Gone was the healthy tan, the confident smile. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair messy, her coat pulled on hastily as if she had rushed out without thinking. In her hands was a crumpled stack of papers. I recognized the legal notice immediately. "Mom!" she panted, her voice breaking. "What is this? What's going on?" I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said gently. "It's cold outside." Lauren walked in but didn't sit down. She stood in the middle of the living room, eyes darting around as if searching for an explanation hidden somewhere on the walls, the shelves, Richard's armchair. A few seconds later, Ethan Miller appeared behind her. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, his face usually marked by an overconfident ease. But today, that confidence was cracked. His jaw was tight, his eyes darkened when he saw me. "What kind of stunt is this?" Ethan said bluntly, without greeting me. "We just got back and received an eviction notice. Are you out of your mind?" Lauren turned to him. "Ethan, please." Then back to me, her voice breaking. "Mom, say something. This is a misunderstanding, right? That apartment is ours. We bought it. We have the paperwork." I walked over to the sofa and sat down. I gestured for them to sit, but neither did. That was fine. I didn't need them seated to speak. Lauren, I said calmly, did you read the notice carefully? She swallowed. It says the building belongs to you, that our contract is only a limited right of use. That can't be true. Ethan scoffed. You think you can fool us? Richard was just a banker. Where would he get the money to own an entire building? I looked at Ethan, really looked at him, for the first time in a long while. You know, I said evenly, Richard never liked showing off, and he especially disliked showing anything to people who only see money. Ethan opened his mouth to say something, but I raised a hand. Strangely, he fell silent. I stood up and walked to the wooden cabinet by the window. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a thin folder, copies, not originals. I placed them on the coffee table. These are the ownership documents for the building, I said. The company listed is Evergreen Holdings, LLC. That company belonged to Richard. Lauren bent down, trembling as she flipped through the pages. Each line, each seal seemed to drain a little more strength from her body. I watched her shoulders slowly slump. That's impossible, she whispered. Dad never told me. He told me, I replied, and he knew why. Ethan stepped forward, snatched the papers, skimmed them in panic. This isn't legal, he said loudly, as if reassuring himself. We'll sue. We have lawyers. You're free to, I said. But Daniel Wright prepared everything. It's all legal. Every transaction, every contract. No loopholes. Lauren let the papers fall onto the table. She looked at me, her eyes filled with both anger and confusion. So you did all this behind my back? Like you did to me? I asked, without raising my voice, without accusation. The room fell silent. Ethan turned to Lauren as if truly seeing his wife for the first time. You said she agreed, he snapped. You said she didn't need those things anymore. Lauren broke down. I thought Mom would understand. She doesn't go to the lake house anymore. The watch just sat in a drawer. That was my life, I said, my voice lowering for the first time. And your father's. Lauren collapsed onto the chair, covering her face with her hands. I felt her body shake like a lost child. Ethan, on the other hand, paced the room, furious and restless. You can't do this, Ethan said. We just got back. We don't even have stable jobs. Are you really going to throw your daughter out onto the street? I looked at him, then at Lauren. In that moment, I didn't see enemies. I saw two adults who had grown used to living off what wasn't truly theirs. Lauren, I said, turning back to my daughter, I'm not asking you to understand me anymore. She looked up, eyes swollen. Mom, I'm not asking you to love me, I continued. I'm not asking you to remember your father. I'm only saying one thing. I paused, letting each word carry its weight. You will have to leave. Ethan spun around. No way. Within 30 days, I said clearly, as stated in the legal notice. No sooner, no later. Lauren shook her head again and again. Mom, please, I was wrong. I didn't know it would end like this. I just thought... You thought about yourself, I said, not about me. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Lauren looked around the room where she had grown up, where laughter once filled the air, then back at me. Not the mother who always shielded her, but a woman standing firmly on her own feet. Ethan exhaled sharply, as if realizing they had lost everything they thought was secure. He grabbed Lauren's hand. We're leaving, he said. We won't let this go. Lauren stood up slowly. Before stepping outside, she turned back to look at me one last time. Mom, are you really going to do this? I nodded. I already have. The door closed. The sound wasn't loud, but it echoed through the house for a long time. I stood still for a moment, one hand resting on the back of the sofa. I felt no victory, no satisfaction, just a marker, a moment I knew would define something. For the first time in my life, I had not bowed my head to the child I gave birth to. Outside, the rain began to fall softly. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself tea. It had cooled slightly, just warm enough. I held the cup with both hands, looking out the window, knowing that everything had moved into a different chapter. After Lauren and Ethan left my house in chaos, the place grew so quiet it felt almost hollow. Not the pleasant kind of quiet, but the kind where you hear every tick of the clock, every gust of wind through the trees outside. I lived in that silence for a few days, not calling Lauren, not answering any of her calls either. Daniel confirmed that all legal procedures were proceeding as planned. No formal appeals had been filed. Ethan had contacted a lawyer, but soon after, everything went quiet. I knew they were panicking. 3 days later, Lauren returned. This time, she came alone. I was in the backyard trimming the lavender. Bushes Richard had planted years ago when I heard a car stop by the gate. I didn't turn around right away. I kept working, slowly, steadily. Only when I heard familiar footsteps on the stone path did I straighten up. Lauren stood there, hands clasped together, shoulders slightly shaking. The tension and anger from before were gone. In their place was a visible exhaustion, as if she had cried so much there were no tears left. "Mom," Lauren said softly, hoarsely, "can I talk to you?" I nodded and gestured for her to come inside. We sat across from each other in the living room, just far enough not to touch, but not so far that we could pretend to be strangers. Lauren lowered her head first. "Ethan. He's not who I thought he was." I didn't respond. "We've been arguing non-stop for days," she continued. "He said this was all your fault, that you were selfish, that you ruined our future." Her voice cracked, but then I realized he was only worried about himself. I looked at her, and for the first time since Richard died, I saw real confusion in Lauren's eyes, not calculation. "He said that if there was no apartment, no money, then he didn't see any reason to stay," Lauren went on, almost whispering. "He packed his things. He left, Mom." I took a deep breath. There was no joy in me, only a dull sadness like seeing a crack I'd known about for a long time finally split wide open. Lauren looked up at me, her eyes red. I was wrong. I trusted him too much. I thought I was building a better life, but really I was just chasing things that didn't belong to me. I stayed silent for a long time. Old images rose in my mind. Lauren at 5 or 6, hair in braids, running toward me after school to show me a crooked drawing. Lauren at 12, sitting on the steps of the lake house, crying because kids had teased her. Lauren at 18, hugging me tightly the day she left for college. I once believed I understood my daughter. Maybe I did, but I hadn't been strict enough. "Lauren," I finally said, my voice slow and clear, "I could make you leave that building in 30 days, as the law allows. I have every right to do that." She nodded slightly, as if she'd already prepared herself for those words. "But I can also choose a different path," I continued. Lauren looked up, a fragile spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "What path, Mom?" I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. "A path with no ease, no luxury, none of the things you're used to." I turned back to her. "I won't give you money. I won't give you a luxury apartment. But I can offer you a simple temporary place to live. A much smaller apartment in an older building. No elevator, no concierge, no amenities." Lauren swallowed. I can accept that." "There's more," I said. "You'll have to support yourself. Get a job. Any honest job. And on top of that," I paused for a moment, "you'll have to do community service, work with people society often forgets, the elderly, the homeless, people who have no one by their side." Lauren froze. "Community service? Your father used to say," I went on, "that people only truly understand their own value when they see the suffering of others. I want you to learn that, not through words, but through experience." Lauren was silent for a long time. I could see the struggle inside her. Finally, she nodded. "If that's what you want, I'll do it." "It's not what I want," I said. It's what you need if you want to stay." Lauren let out a breath, as if a heavy weight had lifted. "What about Ethan?" she asked softly. "Ethan has made his choice," I replied. "I'm not stopping him, and I won't decide that for you." Lauren lowered her head. He said he won't live that way. He said that's not the life he wants." I nodded. "Then he leaves." Lauren closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to go with him." That sentence landed between us, heavy but clear. I looked at her. Not the proud woman who sold her mother's assets, but someone standing at a crossroads, stripped bare and fragile. "You have time to think," I said, "but I won't change the conditions." Lauren stood and stepped toward me. She hesitated for a second, then wrapped her arms around me. The hug was loose, cautious, as if she feared I might push her away. I didn't. I placed my hand on her back, gentle but firm. "I'll stay," Lauren whispered, "alone." When the door closed behind Lauren as she left to pack her things, I sat down, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. Not exhaustion from winning, but from choosing. I had chosen neither cold justice nor total abandonment. I had chosen a harder road for both of us. Outside, the afternoon light settled over the garden. I thought of Richard, of what he might say if he could see me now. Perhaps he wouldn't say much, just smile, as he always did, trusting that I had chosen correctly, not for immediate peace, but for something that might redeem a human being. Lauren moved into the new apartment on a cloudy morning. I didn't go with her, not because I didn't care, but because I knew there are first steps that, if I stand beside her, she'll never truly take. The apartment was in the southern part of the city, in an old 3-story building built in the 1970s. No lobby, no thick carpets or expensive perfume, just a narrow hallway, dim yellow lights, and the harsh clang of metal doors closing. Lauren called me after setting down her single suitcase on the floor. "Mom," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I'm here." "Are you okay?" I asked. There was a very brief silence. No amenities, but okay. I knew that wasn't okay in the way Lauren once understood it, but it was a beginning. Lauren's first days were heavy. She had to learn things she'd never paid attention to before. Taking the right bus, comparing prices at the grocery store, writing down every small expense. I didn't give her money. I only paid the rent for the apartment as agreed. The rest was her responsibility. Lauren found a part-time job at a nearby medical supply store. The work wasn't glamorous, the pay just enough to live on. I didn't ask much. I only heard Daniel mention that Lauren had signed a 6-month employment contract, and that alone was a sign to me. But the real change began when Lauren stepped into the nursing home. St. Margaret's Nursing Home sat on the edge of the city. A low building painted a faded cream, surrounded by a wooden fence and a few old maple trees. I'd been there a few times years earlier, attending small charity events with Richard. I remembered the smell of disinfectant mixed with hot tea and a strange kind of quiet. Not because there were no people, but because there was no one to talk to. Lauren began volunteering 3 days a week, exactly as I'd required. She wasn't given easy tasks. The manager assigned her to daily assistance, pushing wheelchairs, reading letters, sitting and listening to the elderly tell their stories, sometimes just sitting quietly beside them. The first evening after volunteering, Lauren called me. Her voice was hoarse and tired. "Mom," she said, "I didn't think it would be like that." "Like what?" I asked. "The people there." Lauren slowed, searching for words. "They're not poor. They don't go hungry. But they're very lonely." I didn't say anything. I let her continue. "Today, I met an elderly woman," Lauren went on. "She showed me an old silver bracelet. She said it was a birthday gift from her son 15 years ago. She told me her son is very busy, doesn't call often, but she's sure he remembers her." Lauren paused. I could hear her uneven breathing. "Later," she continued. A nurse told me that son moved to another state a long time ago, left no address, never came back. Something in Lauren's voice made me grip the phone tighter, not from pain, but because I knew she was starting to see. In the weeks that followed, Lauren stopped calling me every day. She was busy, tired, but each time she did call, her voice had changed a little, less defensive, less blaming. She told me about Mr. Henry, a former carpenter with no living relatives, about Mrs. Ruth, who sat by the window every afternoon, looking out at the parking lot, waiting for a car that never came, about birthdays celebrated simply with store-bought cake and a few candles, but no family. "Mom," Lauren said during a late call, "I think I came very close to becoming someone who made them sit there." That sentence fell between us, heavy and true. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, watching the drizzle fall on the awning. I thought of myself sitting in the cardiology waiting room, reading the text about selling the house and the watch. I thought of what would have happened if Richard hadn't left that envelope. "I think that realization is a good thing," I finally said. "Seeing it before it's too late." Lauren's awakening didn't come in a dramatic moment. It came slowly, day by day, through repetitive tasks, through old stories told again and again, through eyes filled with hope and then disappointment. She began staying at the nursing home longer than required. No one asked her to. She chose to. Sometimes just to listen to an old song playing from a crackling radio. Sometimes to reread a letter that had already been read hundreds of times. I didn't know these things because Lauren bragged. I knew because one day the facility manager called me. "Mrs. Brooks," she said gently, "I just wanted you to know, your daughter takes this work very seriously. She's not just going through the motions." I thanked her and hung up, my chest filling with a feeling I couldn't quite name. I didn't interfere. I didn't call to advise. I didn't show up unexpectedly. I let Lauren collide with that simple life, with the people society so easily forgets. Some nights, I sat alone in the living room, looking at Richard's empty chair, and wondered, was I being too hard? Was I punishing my child more than necessary? Then I remembered the look in Lauren's eyes when she sold the lake house, so certain without hesitation, and I understood. Some collapses are necessary, not to destroy, but to rebuild from a true foundation. Hope didn't flare brightly inside me. It was small, fragile, like a nightlight in a dark hallway. But it existed, and for a woman my age, that was enough to wait a little longer. I returned to the lake house one misty morning when the water was so still it reflected every slow-moving gray cloud. The narrow road leading in was covered with wet maple leaves, the air mixed with the scent of damp wood and wild grass. I parked the car and sat for a long moment before opening the door, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to hold on to that moment, the moment I knew I had reclaimed what had once been so cruelly taken from me. The house stood there, unchanged in location, but different in feeling. Paint peeled from the porch. A few boards on the railing creaked in the wind. A long scratch marked the front door. Someone must have been in a hurry once. I placed my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The familiar smell rushed toward me. Old wood, paper, black tea Richard loved. I didn't cry. I just stood still, letting each room speak to me in the quiet language of memory. I decided not to sell the house. The decision came quickly. So quickly it surprised even me. Daniel had suggested selling it would be easy, safe, and financially sensible. But I knew that if I sold it, I would be closing, a door I needed to open. I wanted to restore the house, not to return to the past, but to lay a new foundation. I called Lauren that evening. She was silent when I told her I'd taken back the lake house. Then she asked softly, "What are you going to do next, Mom?" "Clean up," I said. "Repair things. If you want, you can come help." Lauren didn't answer right away. It wasn't until the next day that she texted back, "I'll come this weekend." Lauren arrived on Saturday morning wearing an old jacket and worn sneakers. No suitcase, no designer items, just a small backpack. I watched her step out of the car and stand in front of the house, her gaze resting on the shimmering lake. She didn't speak, just let out a long breath, as if setting down something heavy she'd been carrying. We started with small tasks, clearing leaves from the porch, dusting the living room, taking down faded curtains. Lauren wasn't used to physical labor. I saw it immediately as she struggled with the leaf rake, movements awkward, hands reddening from the cold. But she didn't complain. She bit her lip and kept going. At noon, I handed her Richard's old leather gloves. Her fingers paused. "Dad's?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He used them when fixing the back porch." Lauren put them on and nodded quietly. For the first time, I saw her work without reluctance, without being prompted. We worked side by side, each on our own task, saying little. The sound of sweeping, wood lightly knocking, wind moving through the trees, a slow, steady rhythm. In the days that followed, Lauren came more often, weekends, then some weekday afternoons when she got off work early. She learned how to scrape old paint, mix mortar, replace rotted boards. Some days her hands blistered. I handed her a tube of ointment. She gave a strained smile, said, "It's fine," and kept working. We began talking more, not heavy conversations, but small, scattered ones. I told Lauren about the time Richard and I bought this house when his salary was still low and I worked 2 jobs. Lauren told me about the nursing home, about Mr. Henry who liked staring at the lake in a photo hanging in the hallway, about Mrs. Ruth who asked Lauren to help write a letter that was never sent. At one point, Lauren stopped and looked out at the water. "Mom," she said, "I never thought working like this could make someone feel so at peace." I didn't answer. I just smiled. Our relationship didn't return to what it once was, and I didn't expect it to. But it softened, less sharp, less guarded. Silences no longer worried me. They became comfortable. One afternoon, while we were clearing weeds behind the house, Lauren called me over. "Mom, look at this." At the edge of the property, beyond the maple trees, was a stretch of open land hidden by brush. I vaguely remembered Richard mentioning something about the neighboring plot, but I'd never paid much attention. We walked around, following an old path. The land opened up wider than I expected, flat, facing the lake, usable with a little clearing. I stood there for a long time. The wind stirred. The lake rippled softly. Lauren stood beside me, silent. "Your father once said," I spoke slowly, "that this place could be used to do something meaningful." Lauren turned to look at me. "What is it, Mom?" I didn't answer right away. The idea had been quietly taking shape in me, from the stories Lauren told about the nursing home, from the afternoons we worked side by side, from the sense of calm I felt standing by this lake. "A place for older people," I finally said, "not a nursing home. A small, warm place where they can come to stay, to rest, to look at the water and remember that they are still seen." Lauren's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Yes," I replied. "Not big, not luxurious, just enough for a few people to have a place to sit, windows facing the lake, a small kitchen to cook dinner." Lauren fell silent, then nodded. I think Dad would like that idea." I looked at her and saw that the eagerness for a money-making project was gone, replaced by care and sincerity. "I want to name the place after your father," I said. "Richard." Lauren swallowed. I want to help." We didn't rush. I called Daniel to ask about the legal side. The adjacent land belonged to us legally, just as Richard had arranged. Everything could begin slowly. No promotion, no loud fundraising, just doing things the right way. In the days that followed, we repaired the house while sketching ideas. Lauren took notes, drew simple layouts. I offered practical input, step-free paths, handrails, gentle lighting, things I knew because I was old and because I had seen loneliness up close. One evening, as we sat on the back porch drinking hot tea, Lauren spoke softly. "Mom, if back then you hadn't, If you hadn't been so firm, I don't think I ever would have understood. I looked at the lake growing darker. I didn't do it so you would understand, I said. I did it so you would have a chance to change. Lauren nodded and said nothing more. The project named Richard began that way, not with a groundbreaking ceremony, not with speeches, just with new bricks laid on old ground, with hands once unfamiliar with labor, slowly learning a steady, honest rhythm. And for the first time since the day I read that fateful message, I stood by the lake, looked at the old house coming back to life, and knew this: some things, once lost, never return exactly as they were. But some things, with patience and honesty, return in a better form. The Richard Project began operating in an early autumn. Thin morning mist covered the lake. Sunlight slanted through maple trees, turning color, reflecting off the newly installed windows of the small building behind the house. There was no large sign, no opening ceremony. Just a few wooden chairs on the porch, a gently sloped walkway with no steps, and the smell of toast drifting from the shared kitchen each morning. The first older guests came through St. Margaret's nursing home. They didn't stay long, 1 week, sometimes 2. They came to rest, to look at the water, to sleep without sirens waking them, to have someone sit with them at dinner. I didn't call the place a facility. I called it home. Lauren was there almost every day. She woke up early, took the bus to her part-time job at the medical supply store, then returned to the lake in the afternoon. I saw her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables slowly. Saw her sitting on the porch, listening to an old man tell the same train story from his youth. Saw her making beds, wiping handrails, checking lights. No one told her to. No one took credit. She did it because it needed to be done. One evening, as we reviewed the expense ledger together, Lauren spoke very softly. "Mom, I think I want to study again." I looked up. "Study what?" "I want to study elder care," she said calmly. "Not a short course. I want to do it properly." I didn't ask why. I looked at her, at hands rougher than before, at the way she carefully recorded every small expense, and I nodded. "If you've thought it through." Lauren smiled. It wasn't reckless excitement or hollow confidence. It was steady and grounded. She applied to study again, took a more stable job at a nearby medical center. The pay wasn't high, the hours weren't easy, but Lauren didn't complain. I saw a different Lauren, not because she changed to please me, but because she had found her own rhythm. I didn't need to advise or control. I simply watched from a distance, with a kind of peace I'd never had before. Then Ethan came back. It was a cold afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly. The doorbell rang, not urgent, not aggressive. I opened the door and saw Ethan standing there, thinner, wearing a dark coat, holding a knit cap. He looked at me awkwardly as if unsure where to stand. "Mrs. Brooks," Ethan said quietly, I'd like to talk." I invited him in, but didn't call Lauren. I knew that if needed, she would come on her own. Ethan sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped. "I came to apologize," he said, "for what I did, for how I spoke, for everything." I looked at him, neither nodding nor shaking my head. "Have you really thought about it?" I asked. Ethan let out a breath. "I've lost a lot," he said, and I realized I always looked for the shortest path. When it collapsed, I didn't know how to stand back up. I didn't comfort him. I didn't accuse him. I only said, "Lauren is on the porch." Ethan stood, hesitated, then went outside. I didn't follow. I stayed by the fire, listening to the wind brush the windows. Some conversations lose all meaning if I intervene. After a while, Lauren came back inside. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. Her calm told me the decision had already been made. "He apologized," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "He wants us to start over." Lauren looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not going back to the old path," she said. "Not because of my mother, not because of this project, but because I'm no longer that person." "I can change," Ethan said. "Maybe," Lauren replied, "but I'm not waiting." The words weren't sharp, just final. Ethan stood there a moment longer, then nodded and left. When the door closed, Lauren stood still. I didn't step toward her. I let her have that moment. That night, Lauren sat beside me by the fire. "You don't need to say anything, Mom," she said. "I'm okay." I nodded. I didn't need to say anything. I knew. The Richard Project found its own rhythm. People came with their stories, then left, leaving behind handwritten notes, quick photos, thank you letters in trembling handwriting. I read every letter and placed them in a small wooden box. Lauren put the box on a shelf beside a framed photo of Richard. Some afternoons I stood on the porch, watching the lake change color with the light, and it felt as if Richard was somewhere nearby, not as a painful memory, but as a quiet presence. In the height of the handrails Lauren adjusted, in the way she softened the lighting, in simple choices done right. Family, I realized, isn't about holding on through money or property. Family is learning to stand beside each other without harm, giving each other the chance to make things right, without promising what can't be kept, respecting each other's choices, even when they differ from what we once dreamed. I no longer call Richard's legacy money. Money comes and goes. His legacy is a standard of decency, responsibility, of preparing for the days when you're no longer here. Lauren lives within that legacy, in her own way, and I, at this age, learned something simple. Some families never return to their old shape, but if they are honest enough, they can be redefined, stronger, and more real. The letter arrived on a quiet morning when the lake lay flat like a mirror and mist clung to the porch railing. I was making tea when Daniel called. His voice was lower than usual, careful as if afraid to disturb something fragile. "Helen," he said, "it's time." I understood immediately, though we had never spoken of it again after Richard died. Richard had a habit of arranging things by timing, as if he believed some doors should only be opened after a person had lived through enough storms to understand what lay behind them. I set the teacup down, looked out at the lake, and felt a familiar steadiness in my chest. Not urgency, not fear, just quiet readiness. That afternoon, Lauren and I sat across from Daniel in his old office. Light streamed through the tall windows, falling across the desk darkened by years. Daniel placed a thick, sealed envelope in front of us. In the corner, Richard's handwriting was clear and steady, just as it had been in life. Richard asked that this be opened when the community project was running steadily, Daniel said, and when both of you were ready. Lauren took a deep breath. I placed my hand over hers and felt the slight tremble. I said nothing. In moments like this, words only dilute meaning. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a neatly arranged set of legal documents. He read the letter first, his voice even, letting each sentence stand on its own. Richard wrote that he didn't want his assets to become a source of division. He wrote that money, if not placed correctly, only magnifies the worst in people. Then he spoke of the community fund, not as a new idea, but as a seed he had planted long ago, waiting for enough light. Under that late will, most of Richard's remaining assets, investments he had kept private, were transferred into a fund for the elderly community. The fund didn't bear his name in any grand way. It had a simple name, like Richard himself, Lakeview Community Trust. Its purpose was clear: short-term housing support, emotional care, and small projects to help older people feel seen and heard. Daniel paused and turned the page. "Richard appointed both of you as trustees," he said, "with the condition that major decisions must be made together." Lauren looked up, eyes wide. What I saw there wasn't excitement, but real concern. Responsibility, when it arrives at the right time, doesn't make people joyful. It makes them quiet. "Your father trusts you," I said softly, not to reassure her, but to name what was present. Lauren swallowed. "I'm afraid I'm not good enough," she said. "I'm afraid I'll get it wrong." Daniel smiled gently. "Richard wrote that he didn't need perfection," he said. "He needed honesty." The meeting ended in silence. On the way home, Lauren and I didn't talk much. Wind moved through the roadside trees, dry leaves rustling under the tires. When we reached the house, Lauren stopped on the porch, watching the lake take on its evening colors. "Mom," she said, if I had received this before everything happened, you would have done things differently," I said without thinking, "but you didn't receive it, and maybe your father knew that." Lauren nodded, eyes moist. "I feel like I'm standing on the foundation of things I once broke." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "What's lost can become a foundation," I said, "if we're willing to learn." In the weeks that followed, we began managing the fund, not with long meetings or flashy plans, but with small, concrete decisions. A grant to install handrails in an elderly person's home, a short lakeside stay for a couple who had lived their whole lives amid city noise. Lauren worked carefully, asking more. Then she spoke, writing more than she promised. I watched her and saw a maturity that needed no proof. Lauren wasn't trying to make me proud. She worked because it was right. Once, when a funding proposal was declined for not meeting the mission, Lauren was quiet all evening. But the next morning, she returned to the file, revised it, and resubmitted it in a better form. I didn't need to remind her. I simply stood nearby. Some nights, alone in the living room, I thought about the months I'd lived with anger. I didn't blame myself. I only realized that resentment, even when justified, is a burden. I began learning to let go, not to forget, but not to let it govern every choice. Letting go didn't make things easier. It made them real. I no longer wished Lauren would become the daughter from my memories. I accepted her as she was, learning, repairing, moving forward step by steady step. Our family isn't perfect. Silences still exist. Some cracks never disappear. But it's real. Real in how we say no when needed. Real in how we stay when things are hard. Real in not using money to cover responsibility. One evening, as Lauren and I hung a small sign in front of the lakeside building, just hours of operation and one line, "You are welcome," Lauren turned to me and smiled. The smile wasn't loud or proud. It was enough. I looked up at the sky, clouds drifting slowly. I thought of Richard, not as a distant figure, but as a living standard, in unglamorous decisions, in patience, in the belief that people can grow better if placed in the right position at the right time. And I understood. The final letter didn't close a story. It opened a way of living, where family isn't measured by what we keep, but by what we dare to give, together, responsibly. Many years have passed since the morning I stood in the cardiology waiting room and read that message. Time hasn't erased the memory, but it's dulled its claws. I'm older now, more gray hair, slower steps, but I don't feel smaller. If anything, something in me has grown steady enough for me to realize this. Peace doesn't come from holding tightly, but from putting things where they belong. I live between two places. In winter months, I stay in the city, in a small apartment overlooking a familiar street where I can walk to the library, the cafe, and the weekend farmers market. The rest of the year, I return to the lake house, where mornings bring thin mist, afternoons spill sunlight across the water, and wind through the maples sounds like an old greeting. I no longer see these places as separate. They are two rhythms of one life. Lauren lives simply. She isn't wealthy, isn't flashy, no longer chasing glittering things. She works steadily, studies when needed, returns to the lake, each weekend to support the project named Richard. I see her on the porch talking with short-term guests, see her adjusting lamps so the light doesn't strain older eyes, see her carefully recording every small expense, every support request. Lauren doesn't work to atone. She works because she understands the value of standing on the side of people. We don't forget the past. We just don't live in it. Some afternoons, while cleaning out old storage, I still come across the box that once held Richard's watch. The watch that was sold, then bought back with trust funds as a way to close the circle. I hold it, and remember the morning I received that message years ago. My hands don't shake anymore. I place the watch back in the box, close the lid, and leave it there, as a reminder, not a wound. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't weakness. It isn't forgetting, and it isn't allowing repetition. Forgiveness is choosing not to let anger decide the future. It's setting clear boundaries and standing firmly within them. If that day I had chosen revenge, chosen to let everything collapse to satisfy pain, I might have won, but I would have lost my daughter forever. I chose the harder road, and because of that, I didn't lose her. On quiet evenings, I open my old phone and reread that message. The short, cold words that once took my breath away. I read them like a folded page in a finished book, not to accuse, not to grieve, just to remember that one decision in one moment can redirect an entire life. I'm grateful to the woman I was that day, the 71-year-old who didn't collapse, who chose law over tears, patience over retaliation. Peace came late, but it came real. It isn't loud. It lives in simple dinners, misty mornings, in Lauren's quiet laugh when an older guest tells an old story. It lives in being able to look at my daughter without apologizing to the past or fearing the future. We walk beside each other, not leaning, not blindly shielding, just close enough not to lose our way. I did not lose my daughter. I found myself again. And if there's anything worth keeping from this story, perhaps it's something very simple. When faced with betrayal, you can still choose humanity. Not to lose, but to win in a way that doesn't leave you empty afterward. Before closing this story, I want to sit with you a little longer, like two people sitting side by side as evening falls, unhurried. If you've walked with me from the very first lines, from the moment a message took my breath away to this late-found peace, I am truly grateful. Not everyone has the patience to listen to a long, slow, thoughtful story like this. Where are you reading this from? A loud city, a quiet town, or somewhere far away? Let me know. Just one line is enough. I've always believed a story is only complete when it reaches a real person, in a real place. If this story stirred a memory, an old pain, or a difficult family decision you once had to make, share it in the comments. You are not alone. Many people here have lived through silent losses just like yours. If you felt accompanied, press like and subscribe. Not for me, but for yourself, so the stories that follow can meet you again, gently and honestly, like this one. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.